Chapter 1504. After Zhang Yan left the void creature, he spent half a day setting up a formation inside the skyscraping spiritual boat to isolate the spiritual opportunity. Then he channeled his spiritual energy and released the raft with a flash of 5-colored light. The raft couldn't be activated inside the void creature's body, but it didn't mean that it would be the same everywhere else. Therefore, he had prepared something else. Now that the spiritual opportunity had been cut off, he couldn't touch it at all. Plus, there was no outside interference here, so he could explore without worry. He stepped on it and walked into the scripture pavilion that was halfway up the stairs. He saw that everything here was perfectly preserved, and the most eye-catching spot was an unsealed letter. It seemed that it had been intentionally left here. His heart moved, and he went forward to take it. He glanced at it and opened it, only to see that he didn't recognize the words on it. However, this wasn't a problem for him. He rolled up his sleeves and took down many jade books from the opposite bookshelf. In a flash, he looked through them, and after a slight comparison, he roughly deduced the words on this side. When he read it again, there were no more obstacles. When he finished reading it, he finally knew where this person came from. These people came from a place called Yitong World. Because it was vast, there were a lot of treasures and sections. There were also a lot of rogue cultivators. However, there was a lot of hostility in this world. Sects merged with each other, and it was common for cultivators to fight each other. Not only that, there were also invasions from outer space. In short, there wasn't a single day of peace in this world. As a matter of fact, the invasion of foreign species was actually a common occurrence. On the contrary, the 9 continents were firmly locked in place. This admittedly made it very difficult for cultivators to break through the outer space, but at the same time, it also made it very difficult for the ferocious monsters from the outer space to enter. The owner of the raft was called Ding Chang, and he was an elder of a large sect in the lower realm. He was originally heading elsewhere to visit a friend, but he encountered an unexpected attack on the way. Because the enemy was too strong, he could only leave behind a few people to bring up the rear while he brought the remaining disciples to escape through the void space, hoping to avoid calamity in this way. They were unlucky. They had planned to return as soon as they came out. However, just now, they were being targeted by the void creatures. Ding Chang watched as his disciples and friends disappeared one by one. He knew that he wouldn't be able to escape, so he wrote everything down and explained his identity, hoping that someone who saw him would send a message to the sect. In fact, before he wrote all of this down, even he himself did not have much hope for this. It was only because of his duty, and because he felt that he had let down the sect, he did his best. After Zhang Yan finished reading, he put down the letter and walked up to the upper level of the Sutra Pavilion. There were many manuals of cultivation methods and Taoist manuals placed here, but they were actually just decorations. They were used to show off one's abilities, so the manuals that were recorded were only the most superficial. Most of the manuals only had an external name, and the contents were completely empty. Of course, he wouldn't care about these things, so he flipped through them. That was because he could tell what kind of path this person was walking, what they paid attention to, and how far they could go in the future from the cultivation method used to build their foundation. It was like a plant seed. Whether it would grow into a towering tree or a weed was decided the moment it was planted. After he had finished reading all the books that had written records, he thought to himself, the people of this realm can break through the heaven and earth realm, so at least the cultivators of the upper realm can cultivate to the level of the heavenly abode, and they should have abundant spiritual opportunity. Although there are many disputes in this realm, no one mentioned going to other realms, so this is probably just a single realm. If that's the case, it's suitable for the 9 continents to send people here. His guess was not without reason. What Ding Chang left behind were the words of his own world, not the erosion runes. If he had dealt with the cultivators of the outer world, he would not have missed this point. Besides, although there were few records of the local customs, there was no mention of any outer world. He left the scripture pavilion and walked around. He saw that there was no 2-realm dial or sky dial here. If this person wanted to go back to the inner world, he would most likely rely on this raft. If that was the case, he could use this raft to go to this place. When he thought up to here, he soared up into the sky and looked around for a moment before descending to a tall building. There was a large jade pillar here that was exquisitely carved with dragons, snakes, turtles, and cranes carved on it. This was where the mechanism of the restriction was located. So long as he controlled this place, then the entire raft would naturally be under his control. Walking forward, he pressed his hand on it and poured his Fa-Li into it. Not long after, the entire raft began to tremble lightly. Rays of light flickered and appeared, and the restrictive arrays began to operate one after another. Not long after, a golden ladle flew out from the stone pillar and pointed in a certain direction. He looked up and thought, "Looks like I can go to the Yitong realm with this thing. I can try to go there." This did not conflict with his previous plan because it was to go to the place of the strength Tao root fruit. It did not matter where you were, it only depended on whether you could accurately sense that place. Even if you went to other realms, it did not matter. If he could find the Yitong realm before this, he did not mind going there. Even if he didn't enter the realm, he could leave the 2-realm dial behind and come back in the future when he had the time. Now the 9 continents were looking for the outer world. Originally, the Jiaohua realm was not bad, but it had become a lower realm of the Yunshu realm. Now, it was being targeted by the evil spirits from beyond the heavens, so he could not have too much hope. When he passed by the Yitong realm, there was not enough spiritual opportunity, so it was also a shelter. If this place was really suitable, it could be a way out. With this consideration, he did not hesitate much. He moved the sky-scraping magic boat and followed the direction pointed by the spoon handle. The spoon handle was floating in the air, so it did not only point to one side. Sometimes it moved up, sometimes it moved down, and sometimes it would turn left and right. It even trembled strangely, and there was no pattern in the rotation. Zhang Yan looked indifferent. He moved the magic boat and followed steadily. He knew that the person on the magic boat must have a set of spells to follow the spoon. If he spent some effort, he could deduce it. However, his mana was much higher than this person. He could see things down to the smallest detail and discern the essence, so he did not have to do this anymore. After traveling for about 100 days, the spoon handle was still pointing to one place and there was no more drastic changes. If there were no accidents, they should have reached the Earth realm. He checked and found Yitong realm. However, he did not go down immediately. In these few months, the demonic nature in him was getting stronger, and it was obvious that he was about to find the root fruit. If he went down now, even with his clone, it would take at least 3 to 5 years. It was hard to say what would happen by then. Therefore, he thought about it and decided not to go down for the time being. He took out a 2-realm dial and a sky-reaching dial, used his mana to send the magic boat and threw it into the Yitong realm. After doing this, he did not look anymore and drove the sky-scraping magic boat to fly away. He traveled like this for another year. On this day, the 2-realm dial on the table actually trembled slightly. Zhang Yan's eyes flashed slightly. He could see that this was not a message from within the sect. Instead, it seemed to be from the Yitong realm. It seemed that someone had found this item. However, the person on the other side could not activate the spiritual light for a long time. It should be that person's mana was not high. He thought about it and flicked his finger. A strand of mana was injected into the magic artifact. In an instant, the magic artifact emitted a brilliance. After a while, a young man about 17 or 18 years old appeared in the room. He had delicate features and pretended to be calm. However, his eyes were a little dazed. It was obvious that he could not see the specific situation in the spiritual light. He could only vaguely make out a figure. He hesitated for a while and gritted his teeth. He bowed deeply and said with a trembling voice, "Greetings, senior." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "How did you find this item?" The young man heard his gentle tone and calmed down a little. He said, "It was a coincidence." He then told Xin Lian in detail. It turned out that his surname was Hua and his name was Yingling. He was originally a disciple of a Taoist cultivation sect. He was considered hardworking, but because of his poor aptitude, he could not break through to the next realm. He was often bullied and ridiculed by his peers. This time, he was also unlucky. A senior brother in the sect found a dangerous mystic realm. As he wanted to go there to pick a strange flower to please a beautiful senior sister, he captured him to test the way. Although he was extremely unwilling, The other party was the nephew of an elder in the sect. If he did not agree, he might not be able to stay in the sect anymore. Under his pressure, he had no choice but to go. In the end, he encountered a demon and was forced to hide in a deep ravine. Coincidentally, he found the two-realm dial. Because this magic artifact looked extraordinary, he tried to fiddle with it. However, he did not expect that the spiritual vigor on it would be triggered. After saying all this, he carefully asked, "Is Senior sealed here?" Zhang Yan smiled. If he helped this person up, it would be convenient for him to do things in the future. He said, "Don't be afraid, I won't do anything to you. My background is not something you can know right now. Since we met this time, it must be fate. What do you need? Tell me and I can help you." Hua Yingling's heart thumped. How could he not know that he had encountered a great opportunity? He held back his excitement and said, "Junior's aptitude is extremely poor. My progress on the path of cultivation is extremely slow. Does Senior have a way?" Zhang Yan smiled and said, "Poor aptitude is nothing. You can use techniques to change it. But if you do not have the heart to cultivate, even if I help you, it will not be of much use." Hearing that his aptitude could be changed, Hua Yingling was overjoyed. He hurriedly knelt down and kowtowed, saying, "Junior's heart towards Tao is very firm. Please help me, Senior." Zhang Yan nodded slightly and said, "Since you are sincere, I can help you. First, you need to take a drop of blood and place it on the magic artifact in front of you." Hua Yingling did not hesitate and drew a line on his palm. He then clenched his fist and let the drop of blood fall onto the magic artifact. Zhang Yan's eyes moved. After observing for a while, he already knew the root of the magic artifact. He raised his hand and made a pill in an instant. Then he used his power to send it over. He said, "Take this and wait for half a day. After that, you will see the effects." Spiritual light flashed on Hua Yingling's magic artifact, and a fragrant pill appeared out of thin air. He was instantly very excited. He took a few steps forward and took the pill. He put it in his mouth and immediately swallowed it. Chapter 1505. After swallowing the pill, Hua Yingling didn't feel anything at first. He only felt his body was warm, and at the same time he felt his surroundings were brighter and clearer. But after a while, he found something was wrong. His thoughts became abnormally lively. Many questions that he couldn't answer usually only needed a slight change in his thoughts. It was as if success was achieved when the conditions were right, and he naturally understood them. This momentum couldn't be stopped. The more he thought, the deeper he went. He could even draw inferences and think about things that normal people couldn't reach. Due to his low natural talent, he was usually a quiet and self-abased person. However, at this moment, his eyes gradually glowed with a trace of confidence. On the surface, he didn't seem to have changed much from before. He was still the same person. His spiritual power didn't increase, but inside, his mind, energy, and spirit had completely changed. After all, there were very few people in the world that were indomitable. If one were to encounter failure over and over again, then no matter how great one's ambition was, one would become dispirited and depressed. Even though his ambition wasn't able to grow, he'd never given up in the end, and his disposition was actually sufficiently tenacious. Now that he'd suddenly obtained a fortuitous encounter to make up for his shortcomings, he was filled with a high-spirited and energetic spirit. He straightened his robe, bowed, and said solemnly, "Thank you, Elder, for the pill. If there is anything you need me to do, please tell me. I will do my best to do it." As his intelligence increased, his mind became exceptionally clear. He didn't look at problems on the surface, but more deeply. He knew that nothing in the world came without a reason. Zhang Yan asked, "Do you have an official teacher?" Hua Yingling shook his head and replied, "My talent was low in the past, and no one paid attention to me. It was good enough that no one looked down on me. No teacher was willing to take me in." Zhang Yan, "How about this? My disciple is in charge of a sect called Hanyuan. Now that he is no longer in this world, I will take you in as a registered disciple on his behalf. How about that?" Hua Yingling didn't hesitate. He lifted his robe and knelt down, respectfully kowtowing. "Greetings, Grandmaster. He understood. Not to mention anything else, this senior had helped him change his aptitude. Just this kind of great opportunity alone was not something he could refuse. Moreover, this kind of heaven-defying method was unheard of. That sect must have a great background, and he might even have taken advantage of it. Zhang Yan smiled faintly and said, "Today's etiquette is not complete. In the future, when you officially become my disciple, you can make up for it. Get up and tell me everything that happened in detail." Hua Yingling replied and stood up. He briefly explained the matters of the Jie realm. He was only a junior disciple, and his knowledge was limited. Therefore, he only spoke of the information he had obtained through hearsay. Zhang Yan listened and nodded slightly. What Hua Yingling said was very similar to what he saw from the ritual raft. The area here was extremely vast, and because of the flourishing spiritual opportunity, there was no lack of external objects. Thus, there were many itinerant cultivators everywhere, and people of unknown origins could be found everywhere. Under such circumstances, even the influence of some large sects was limited. It seemed that this place was indeed suitable for people from the 9 states to settle down. He thought for a moment, then said, "Recite the incantations of the techniques you have learned." The method Hua Yingling learned was the most common. Even a servant could buy it for a certain amount of money. There was nothing to hide, and he recited it word by word. Zhang Yan listened. There were too many omissions in this method. Many parts were obviously modified. Although there was no difference in the beginning, the longer the time passed, the greater the difference. It seemed that Hua Yingling had always been at the bottom. It wasn't just a matter of talent, but the method also played a part. Right now, Hua Yingling could be considered his disciple. Before the cultivators of the 9 continents arrived, he had to rely on him as a vanguard. He had to think of a way to increase his strength, but at the same time, he couldn't attract too much attention. He thought for a moment and made some deductions. In an instant, he completely supplemented the method. Not only that, he even improved it by a level. Then he said, "Since you have become my disciple, I will teach you another method on his behalf. You just need to practice it well." As he spoke, he slowly recited an incantation. Hua Yingling memorized it. He quickly realized that this method was what he had learned. But some parts were wrong. With his current intelligence, although he couldn't immediately understand it, he could feel that if he practiced according to this method, he could increase his cultivation by a few levels in a short amount of time. Not only that, at the same time, he realized that there was a big problem with the method passed down in the sect. This method was most likely not only to prevent the true method from being spread, but also because of the selfishness of the person in charge of the sect. They made sure that the foundational method would forever remain in the hands of their own disciples. If he was still in the same situation as before, he would most likely be furious. He would hate the injustice of the world, hate the unfairness of the world. But now he only looked at it calmly, because he knew that no matter how much he lamented and cursed, it wouldn't change the world at all. Instead, it would mess up his own state of mind. Rather than that, it would be better to spend more time on cultivation. He deeply believed that with his ability, even without all this, he could still forge a path forward. After Zhang Yan finished reciting the method, he said kindly, "With your current talent, if you practice according to this method, there shouldn't be any problems. But you must remember, the matters of the world cannot be solved with just your spiritual power. Only with the support of others and the support of the bigger picture can you go far." Hua Yingling's heart moved, and he said seriously, "I will remember. Zhang Yan, I have said all that needs to be said. If you have any achievements in the future, there will naturally be people from the sect who will come to find you." As he said this, the spiritual light on the dial began to fade. Hua Yingling saw that his figure was about to disappear, and hurriedly said, "I don't know Grandmaster's name, so that I can worship you day and night." As he said this, he knelt down and bowed heavily. When the spiritual light was almost completely extinguished, he only heard the 2 words, "Xianyuan." Xianyuan. He silently prayed and raised his head. He saw that there was no longer any movement on the 2-realm dial. It looked like an ordinary item. This instrument had sent over a medicinal pill, but it had almost used up all of its spiritual opportunity. If he wanted to use it again, he would have to wait for it to accumulate again. This would require tens or even hundreds of years of effort. He carefully took the instrument, knowing that in the future he would have to rely on it to communicate with the sect. However, after thinking about it for a moment, he felt that it was not appropriate to keep it on him. It would be better to leave it here for now, and when his cultivation base was higher, he would come back to retrieve it. So he dug a large hole and buried the instrument. Even then, he was still not at ease, so he moved a large boulder over and carefully cleaned up all traces. Finally, seeing that there were no more flaws, he turned and left. After putting the two-realm dial back together, Zhang Yan stopped thinking about the matter. He was just going to be idle in that realm, and he might not be able to use it in the future. Although he might have to face the almighty True Yang cultivator in 10,000 years, when that time came, the mountain and sea realm might be able to deal with him. There was no need for him to go to another realm. He calmed his thoughts and once again entered a meditative state. He continued to push the strand of devilishness to sense the location of the root and fruit. Su Ben had already touched that place, and this time, it was incomparably smooth. However, after more than 30 days, the demonic nature finally sensed the location, and it seemed that as long as he willed it, he would be able to escape into it. However, he did not do so immediately. Based on what had happened earlier, it was possible that someone would come to fight with him for the root and fruit. When that time came, he would most likely have to face a fierce battle. His opponent would most likely be someone skilled in the divine contract technique, and he knew that such an opponent would be difficult to deal with. Therefore, he needed to adjust his Dharma body to its most perfect state. Another 10 days passed. He finally emerged from his meditative state. His eyes were mysterious, as if he were in the vast void, and the five-colored light rotated behind him. At this moment, he was completely prepared. Thus, with a thought in his mind, his entire body and the sky-piercing arc suddenly vanished from the void spirit sea in an instant. Zhang Yan only felt a little dizzy. The skyscraping Dharma ship had stopped outside, and he knew that he had arrived at the boundary. He used his senses to look outside, and found that he had stopped on a piece of land. He pondered for a while and came out of the Dharma ship. He looked into the distance and saw that it was desolate without any spiritual vigor. The ground was scarlet in color, and there were exposed rocks everywhere. Everything was extremely quiet. He looked up and found that his gaze could penetrate the layers of void, and he saw that there was a similar piece of land there. It looked like one was in front of the other, and the other was in the opposite direction. However, his cultivation was still there. Soon, he found that it was actually an extension of the land he was standing on. It looked like it was divided into two parts, but it was originally one. However, he was not too surprised. If he wanted to, he could also create a similar scene in his own small world. Moreover, a person who had entered the mortal transformation had already become a world of his own, and he could not be disturbed by any external disturbances. The scenery here was just a little strange, and it was not worth exploring. The key was to find the root and fruit and complete his cultivation. He used his devilishness to explore, and found that the root and fruit should be here. It seemed to be right next to him, but also seemed to be separated by a layer. He was not overly anxious. Now that he was here, he could take his time to search. The root and fruit of the Tao of Strength was not a corporeal object. Instead, it was a way for cultivators to examine themselves. The clearer their understanding, the better it would be for their magical power, and the more powerful their divine abilities would be. In fact, it would be even more difficult for others to divine them. If he could not find it, then his cultivation base would not be complete. The demon patriarch of the mountain and sea realm also had his own root and fruit. However, compared to cultivators of the Tao, it was much more superficial. Once the root and fruit was formed, it would become the foundation of one's cultivation base. If one wanted to progress further in the future, it would be impossible to rely on one's own ability. The only way to do that was if an almighty being was willing to sacrifice himself to personally expound on the Tao. Of course, the chances of that happening were even slimmer. Zhang Yan had not yet found it, not because he had not cultivated the divine contract to perfection, but rather because he had no idea why the technique had been created and where that mysterious object had come from. If he did not understand what had happened in the past, he would not be able to understand what would happen in the future. Just now was the time to explore the source and gain enlightenment. However, that was not something that could be accomplished overnight. He needed to slowly comprehend and study it. When he understood the key to the transformation, that would be the day he found the root and fruit. Chapter 1506. Zhang Yan watched from the outside for a long time. He then returned to the skyscraping vessel and drove the vessel to wander around the land. 3 months had passed since then. In reality, there was no turning of time here because the rocks and mountains outside did not even have the slightest movement. It was as if they were frozen silhouettes. However, he could deduce the passage of time based on the consumption of his spiritual vigor. There was no spiritual vigor here, so he could not absorb external qi to replenish his body. He could only rely on the great medicine that he brought from the sect for cultivation. He tried to retreat, but he realized that the way out was not yet closed. However, he did not have the strength to push it open, and he was always a step away. This should be the reason why the spirit comprehending contract was not completed. Based on this, if he did not find the root fruit in the end, he would probably never be able to get out. He was not nervous about this. He had brought a lot of purple pure medicine with him. It would not be a problem for him to maintain it for hundreds of years. This period of time was enough for him to find a way. However, under such circumstances, if other people who owned the Devil's Trove came here, if they stayed for a long time and did not prepare well, they might die before they met their peers. Moreover, the possibility of meeting each other on such a vast and boundless road was too small. Looking at the behavior of the person behind the Devil's Trove, he had been walking the path of encouraging peers to kill each other. There was no reason for it to change here. Therefore, there must be something that he did not understand. It might be the key to finding the root fruit. He thought about it carefully. After he arrived here, no matter where he went, the feeling of the root fruit did not change. This meant that there would be no result if he continued like this. He needed to find another way. Moreover, this was from the demonic nature. Since it could lead him here, there must be some kind of connection between it and the root fruit. Under the situation where there was no other way, it was highly possible to find a breakthrough from here. When he thought of this, he sat down cross-legged and continued to urge the devilish nature. But this time, there was no change for a long time, but he didn't give up because of this. Instead, he unswervingly continued. Around 3 years later, the devilish nature finally produced an undetectable throbbing, and the root fruit seemed to have become slightly clearer. He suddenly understood that he had found the right direction. However, it did not seem like it was a test from the person behind the Devil's Trove. Although it looked simple, it was not easy to get through it. If his will was slightly shaken, he might fail. Especially for those who cultivated in the path of strength, they would not have such patience. After some thought, he realized that it was not normal for the root fruit to be so hard to sense. This might have something to do with the fact that he had weakened the demonic nature before. This strand of demonic nature had already been manipulated by him to the point where it could not be ground away. It was probably because of this reason that it was so hard to sense it. If it was someone else, if they did not deliberately suppress this thing, perhaps it would not be so difficult. However, he did not regret it. The influence of the demonic nature was too great, and he had already sensed the danger from the start. If he allowed it to spread and overflow, he might slowly be affected by it and become someone who was no longer himself. Just because of this little obstacle before him was nothing. Although his demonic nature would continue to grow as he activated it, he was no longer at the same level of cultivation as before. After he severed the past, no matter how much it grew, it would no longer be able to affect his temperament. Unless the demonic nature suddenly underwent a fundamental change, even if that happened, it would only happen after he found the root fruit, not now. Fortunately, this demonic nature was not as strong as before. Before it really went out of control, he was confident that he could suppress it first. As he concentrated on practicing, the feeling of the root fruit became stronger. In the end, his body shook and it seemed like another world opened up in front of him. Looking out, he suddenly had a strange feeling. He seemed to be at the same place but not at the same place. On the surface, there seemed to be no change, but in fact, there was a layer, like the scene in a mirror. If just now was in the surface of the world, then at this moment, it was like stepping into the inside of the world. But this was not the end. It was only a slight step forward towards the root fruit. There was still a long way to go. In other words, he had not yet come into contact with the source of this cultivation method. He was still unable to sort out himself on this Tao and face himself. He realized that the road down would be even more difficult, but it was better to have a path to follow than to be clueless. He did not move forward immediately. Instead, he tried to take a step back. In an instant, he retreated from the inner world and returned to the original surface of the world. After doing this, he nodded inwardly. It seemed that he could still retreat from the place he had passed. It was not as solid as the blockade outside. Of course, this was not the most important thing. He found that this was actually a kind of magical transformation that could allow him to escape to places that were difficult for the enemy to know. Perhaps with the divine contract, he could use it, but he did not know this method in the past. But now, under the guidance of the demonic nature, and through personal experience, he learned it in an instant. If that's the case, the further I go, the more divine abilities and techniques I can learn. In this case, he hoped that the road would be longer. So he adjusted his qi, calmed his mind, and continued to practice the cultivation method. Not long after, he felt another layer of obstruction. But this time, it was a little strange. There were actually two paths to choose from. Moreover, on the surface, there seemed to be no difference between them. No matter how he urged the demonic nature, it was impossible to distinguish between them. He pondered for a while but did not stop for long. Since he could not see through the details, there was no need to stay here. He would first choose a path and use his heart to understand the key points. If he felt that something was wrong, he could just retreat. With this thought in mind, he followed his senses and suddenly felt his body become heavy. He was no longer in a certain space, but was flying at high speed. At this time, the root fruit had also undergone another change. It was no longer nailed to the ground, but it was constantly changing. Every time it noticed something, it would arrive at another place again. This was like the starlight in the sky. What he clung to was only the shadow of the past and not the real substance. If he could not catch up, he could only chase after it and never get close to its true location. However, he did not retreat because of this. Just now, he realized that this place was similar to that inexplicable space. It was just that if he did not observe carefully, he would not be able to detect it. In this space, what the physical body could not achieve did not mean that the divine decree could not be achieved. Thus, he sat down, extended his divine will, and successfully followed. However, in the next moment, his divine will seemed to expand abruptly and continuously extended outwards, reaching a boundless land. In an instant, it pierced through the boundaries of the past and the future. At this time, he finally truly felt the power of the root fruit. In reality, this thing was everywhere, and it had always been by his side. It was just that in an instant, it could change thousands of times, and without the correct method, it would be difficult to see anything. But this did not mean that he had already obtained the root fruit. Although he could follow with his divine decree, it seemed that he was still missing a key point, and ultimately could not merge into one. As he was thinking, he suddenly felt that his divine decree was rapidly being consumed. Obviously, the pursuit of the root fruit had brought about a great burden, so he immediately rotated his vitality to replenish the damage. But this was not a long-term plan. No matter how deep the foundation of a person was, there would come a time when they could not support it. But since the demonic nature had guided him to this place, it could not be a dead end. There must be a solution. After thinking for a while, he more or less knew where to go. With a call in his mind, the devil's slip immediately flew out, and it poured the inexplicable thing into his body, constantly replenishing his vitality. As soon as this inexplicable thing appeared, it seemed to have triggered something, as if a gap had been opened. Endless inexplicable things were born out of thin air, and they all surged towards his body. At this moment, he could clearly distinguish that these inexplicable things did not come from one place, but from countless spaces. Moreover, their existence was extremely short, and it was impossible to sense them individually. Only when he, the demonic nature, and the root fruit resonated with each other could he use the devil slip to activate them. But if he could not follow the rotation of the root fruit, everything would stop. He immediately understood that the divine ability being performed here was to let him know how to actively absorb those inexplicable things to replenish his body's deficiencies. If he could really do this, then his body could be said to have reached the unbreakable realm, and even if he met someone who had severed the past and future, he could still fight them head-on. But before this, he had to obtain the root fruit. Otherwise, if he left this place without the guidance of the demonic nature, it would be extremely difficult for him to use this method. But just this alone was not enough to help him obtain the root fruit. After a long time, he understood that if he continued to stay here, he might not be able to achieve what he wanted, so he retreated and headed in another direction. As soon as he arrived here, he immediately discovered that this place also used divine decree, so he abandoned his body, lightly leapt, and arrived in a chaotic space. At this moment, he was surprised to find that he was standing on an island. The wind was blowing, the sea was green, and the sky was blue. What was strange was that his cultivation level was only at the first stage of the strength path. In front of him, there was a young cultivator with a murderous look looking at him coldly. From the aura of his body, his cultivation level was also the same as his. This person looked at him a few times and said coldly, "Between us, only one can walk out of here alive. I hope you do not disappoint me." Zhang Yan's eyes moved slightly. He did not expect his opponent to appear at this time. He had thought about it before. Usually, the owner of the demonic treasury could come here after reaching the 5th transformation in the strength path. Wouldn't that be too easy for someone with such a high cultivation level like him? Now he finally understood that in this place where the divine decree resided, what appeared here was very likely only a reflection of the future of both parties. It was impossible to use cultivation level to bully the opponent. However, he was not afraid at all. Just now he tried it. Although he could not use normal treasures here, the techniques that he cultivated would not disappear because of this. It should be known that he had not only mastered the strength path body, but also the chi path cultivation. Moreover, he had cultivated every stage to the extreme. Putting aside his fighting ability, no one in the same realm could surpass him in terms of the depth of his foundation. Chi and strength combined could make up for each other's deficiencies. In addition, he did not lose the most convenient sword pill, which meant that he could still use the flying sword technique. In this way, he did not have any shortcomings. In the same realm, he could easily defeat opponents who only had one technique. Immediately, with a thought, a sword chime sounded, and a bright sword light flew out. To be continued. Chapter 1507. After Zhang Yan left the Void Spirit, he spent half a day setting up an array formation inside the skyscraping spirit boat. It was specifically used to isolate the spiritual opportunity. Then, with a flash of 5-colored light, the skyscraping spirit boat was released. The spiritual raft could not be activated inside the body of the void creature, but it did not mean that it would be the same everywhere else. Therefore, he had prepared something else. Now that the spiritual opportunity had been cut off, he could not touch it at all. Moreover, there were no external disturbances here, so he could explore without worry. He stepped on it and walked into the scripture pavilion that was halfway up the stairs. He saw that everything here was perfectly preserved, and the most eye-catching spot was an unsealed letter. It seemed that it had been intentionally left here. His heart moved, and he went forward to take it. He glanced at it and opened it, only to see that he didn't recognize the words on it. However, this wasn't a problem for him. He rolled up his sleeves and took down many jade books from the opposite bookshelf. In a flash, he looked through them, and after a slight comparison, he roughly deduced the words on this side. When he read it again, there were no more obstacles. After he finished reading it, he finally knew where this person came from. These people came from a place called the Itong world. Because it was vast, there were many treasures of the heavens and the earth. Sects stood in great numbers and there were many independent cultivators. However, the evil aura in this world was extremely heavy. Sects merged together, and it was common for cultivators to attack each other. Not only that, there were frequent invasions of otherworldly beings. In short, there was not a single day of peace. As a matter of fact, the invasion of foreign species was actually a common occurrence. On the contrary, the 9 continents were firmly locked in place. This admittedly made it very difficult for cultivators to break through the outer space, but at the same time, it also made it very difficult for the ferocious monsters from the outer space to enter. The owner of the spiritual raft was called Ding Chang. He was an elder of a large sect in this world. He was supposed to visit a friend elsewhere, but he was attacked by an opponent he did not expect. Because the enemy was too strong, he had to leave some people behind and bring the rest of his disciples to escape from outer space. He hoped that they could avoid the attack. They were unlucky. They had planned to return as soon as they came out, but who knew that they would be targeted by the void creatures when they reached outer space? Ding Chang watched as his disciples and friends disappeared one by one. He knew that he would not be able to escape, so he wrote down everything that happened and stated his identity. He hoped that someone who saw him would send a message to the sect. In fact, before he wrote this down, he did not have much hope. He was just doing his duty and felt guilty to the sect, so he did his best. After Zhang Yan finished reading, he put down the letter and walked up to the upper level of the scripture pavilion. There were many cultivation methods and Taoist manuals placed here, but they were actually just decorations. They were used to show off one's own abilities, so the manuals that were recorded were only the most superficial. Most of the manuals only had an external name, and the contents were completely empty. Of course, he wouldn't care about these things, so he flipped through them. That was because he could tell what kind of path this person was walking, what they paid attention to, and how far they could go in the future from the cultivation method used to build their foundation. It was like a plant seed. Whether it would grow into a towering tree or a weed, it was decided the moment it was planted. After he finished reading all the books that had written records, he thought to himself, the people of this realm can break through the heaven and earth realm, so at least the cultivators of the upper realm can cultivate to the level of the heavenly abode, and they should have abundant spiritual opportunity. Although there are many disputes in this realm, no one mentioned going to other realms, so this is probably just a single realm. If that's the case, it's suitable for the 9 continents to send people here. It was not unreasonable for him to guess this. Ding Chang left behind the words of his own world and not the erosion runes. If he had dealt with the cultivators of the other world, he would not have missed this point. In addition, although there were few records of the local customs, there was no mention of any outer world. He left the scripture pavilion and walked around. He saw that there was no 2-realm dial or Tong Tian dial here. If this person wanted to go back to the other world, he would most likely rely on the Dharma raft. If that was the case, he could use the Dharma raft to go there. When he thought up to here, he soared up into the sky and looked around for a moment before descending to a tall building. There was a large jade pillar here that was exquisitely carved with dragons, snakes, turtles, and cranes carved on it. This was where the mechanism of the restriction was located. So long as he controlled this place, then the entire raft would naturally be under his control. Walking forward, he pressed his hand down and poured his Fa Li into it. Not long after, the entire great Dharma raft began to tremble slightly. Rays of light flickered and appeared, and the great restrictive formations began to operate one after another. Not long after, a golden ladle flew out from the stone pillar and pointed in a certain direction. He looked up and thought, looks like I can go to the Yitong realm with this thing. I can try to go there. This did not conflict with his previous plan because it was to go to the place of the strength Tao root fruit. It did not matter where one was, but whether one could accurately sense that place. Even if one went to another realm, it did not matter. If he could find the Yitong realm before this, he did not mind going there. Even if he didn't enter the realm, he could leave the 2-realm dial behind and come back to visit when he had time in the future. Now the 9 continents were looking for the outer world. Originally, the Jiahua realm was not bad, but it had become a lower realm of the Yunshu realm. Now, It was being targeted by the evil spirits from beyond the heavens, so he could not have high hopes. When he passed by the Yitong realm before, there was not enough spiritual opportunity, but it was also a shelter. If this place was really suitable, it could be a way out. With this consideration, he did not hesitate much. He moved the Dharma raft and followed the direction pointed by the spoon handle. The spoon handle was floating in the air, so it did not only point to one side. Sometimes it moved up, sometimes it moved down, and sometimes it turned left and right. It even trembled strangely. There was no pattern in the rotation. However, Zhang Yan looked indifferent. He moved the Dharma raft and followed steadily. He knew that the person on the Dharma raft must have a set of spells to follow the spoon. If he spent some effort, he could deduce it. However, his mana was much higher than this person. He could see things down to the smallest detail and discern the origin, so he did not have to do this anymore. After traveling for about 100 days, the spoon handle was still pointing to one place and there was no more drastic changes. If there were no accidents, they should have reached the Earth realm. He looked around and found Yitong realm. However, he did not go down immediately. In these few months, the demonic nature in his body was getting stronger. It was obvious that he was going to find the root fruit. If he went down now, even with his clone, it would take at least 3 to 5 years. It was hard to say what would happen by then. Therefore, he thought about it and decided not to go down for now. He took out a 2-realm dial and a sky-reaching dial and used his mana to send the Dharma raft down to the Yitong realm. After doing this, he did not look anymore and drove the Dharma raft to fly away. He traveled like this for another year. On this day, the 2-realm dial on the table shook slightly. Zhang Yan's eyes flashed. He could see that it was not a message from within the sect. Instead, it seemed to be from the Yitong realm. From the looks of it, someone must have found this item. However, the other party could not activate the spiritual light for a long time. It should be that person's mana was not high. He thought about it and flicked his finger. A strand of mana was injected into the Dharma raft. In an instant, there was a ray of light on it. After a while, a young man who was about 17 or 18 years old appeared. He had delicate features and pretended to be calm. However, his eyes were a little dazed. It was obvious that he could not see the specific situation inside the spiritual light. He could only vaguely make out a figure. He hesitated for a while and gritted his teeth. He bowed deeply and said with a trembling voice, "Greetings, Senior." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "How did you find this item?" The young man heard his gentle tone and calmed down a little. He said, "Junior found it by coincidence." He then told Xunlian what happened in detail. It turned out that his name was Hua Yingling. He was a disciple of a Taoist sect. He was hardworking, but because of his poor aptitude, he could not break through the barrier. He was often bullied and ridiculed by his peers. This time, he was unlucky. A senior brother in the sect found a dangerous mystic realm. He wanted to go there to pick a strange flower to please a beautiful senior sister, so he captured him to test the way. Although he was extremely unwilling, the other party was the nephew of an elder in the sect. If he did not agree, he might not be able to stay in the sect anymore. Under his pressure, he could only go. In the end, he encountered a demon and was forced to hide in a deep ditch. Coincidentally, he found the 2-realm dial. Because this Dharma raft looked extraordinary, he tried to fiddle with it. However, he did not expect it to activate the spiritual vigor on it. After saying all this, he carefully asked, "Is Senior sealed here?" Zhang Yan smiled. If he helped this person up, it would be convenient for him to do things in the future. He said, "Don't be afraid, I won't do anything to you. My background is not something you can know right now. Since we met this time, it must be fate. What do you need? Tell me and I can help you." Hua Yingling's heart began to beat. How could he not know that he had encountered a great opportunity? He held back his excitement and said, "Junior's aptitude is extremely poor. My progress on the path of cultivation is extremely slow. Does Senior have a way?" Zhang Yan smiled and said, "Poor aptitude is nothing. You can use techniques to change it. But if you do not have the heart to cultivate, even if I help you, it won't be of much use." Hearing that his aptitude could be changed, Hua Yingling was overjoyed. He hurriedly knelt down and kowtowed, saying, "Junior's heart towards Dao is very firm. Please help me, Senior." Zhang Yan nodded slightly and said, "Since you are sincere, I can help you. First, you need to take a drop of blood and place it on the Dharma raft in front of you." Hua Yingling did not hesitate. He drew a line on his palm with his finger and then clenched his fist. He let the drop of blood fall onto the Dharma raft. Zhang Yan used his technique in his eyes. After observing for a while, he already knew the foundation of the Dharma raft. He raised his hand and made a pill in an instant. Then he sent it over and said, "Take this and wait for half a day. After that, you will see the effects." Spiritual light flashed on Hua Yingling's Dharma raft. A fragrant pill appeared out of thin air. He was instantly very excited. He took a few steps forward and took the pill. He put it in his mouth and immediately swallowed it. To be continued. Chapter 1508. With a loud bang, Zhang Yan punched, and another opponent exploded into a cloud of blood mist. The surrounding scene quickly shattered, and soon a new opponent appeared. Facing this person, he also punched. At this moment, he'd already completely stopped utilizing all the variations of his divine abilities besides the Tao of Strength. Because no matter what cultivation realm one was in or how his energy fluctuated, a single punch would still be a single punch, and it wouldn't change due to external factors. The amount of strength one possessed would be able to exert the same amount of might. After annihilating an unknown amount of enemies, his movements suddenly stopped because there wasn't a single person in front of him anymore. Moreover, the surrounding scenery had once again returned to where it was at the very beginning. There was only crimson red rock and a boundless land where he stood. Although no one said it to him, he understood inexplicably in his heart. Just now, the people he was fighting were all those who had practiced the divine contract since ancient times. But even those who had died long ago, as long as they were defeated, their essence would still return to him. This was because once the person who had practiced the divine contract died, his essence would not dissipate, but would return to this place. This meant that if he died, then his origin energy would also be stored here, left for someone even more powerful. This looked very scary, but he did not take it to heart. What he was pursuing was the path of immortality. If he died halfway, then everything would naturally be for naught. Why would he care about what would happen after him? If one day his skills surpassed the person who made the devil trove, the other person would not be able to restrain him. In the end, as long as the divine power and mana were strong enough, then nothing would be a problem. After passing this stage, not only did the magic slip improve a lot, but he himself also gained a lot. His strength method was more complete, and he seemed to have mastered a transformation divine power. However, this middle acupoint was not something that could be mastered in a short time. He needed to calm down and slowly sort it out in the future. Right now, the key was to get the root fruit. He calmed his chi, steadied his mind, and continued to try to sense. The demonic throbbing became stronger than ever. Following the guidance, his spirit instantly landed in an unknown place. Although the root fruit was constantly changing and rotating, it gave him a feeling that it was no longer unreachable. There seemed to be an additional connection between them. He took a step forward and found the root fruit easily. It seemed that if he took another step forward, he would be able to merge with it. At this moment, a wave of understanding surged indifferently in his heart. Because he'd killed all his opponents since the ancient times, if there was anyone who could reap the fruits of his labor, then it would definitely be him. In this world where the past and the future were mixed up, there was no distinction between before and after, or between the beginning and the end. Since his future self had obtained this fruit, it naturally belonged to him. He smiled faintly and didn't continue forward. Instead, he turned around and retreated. The root and fruit were already here, so why bother looking for it? Boom! As soon as he thought of this, he immediately felt his body dispersing. His divine will stretched out limitlessly, spreading across the past and the future. Indescribable things like tides and seas surged from countless worlds and poured into his body, causing his chi activity to rise layer by layer. After a long time, everything finally calmed down. He clenched his fist. Just this action seemed to be able to shake the heaven and earth. This was not an illusion, because in the divine will he could see the real result of the surging of mana. He could even predict the subsequent changes. It was just that the further he went, the more blurry it became. If he were to fight with an enemy, those whose cultivation realm was lower than his would not be able to fight with him. Putting aside the fact that these people's Dao techniques would not be able to harm him, no matter what methods they used, he would be able to see through them beforehand. As for what would happen if he were to meet someone of the same cultivation realm, he still couldn't judge. He would only know after fighting with them. If his physical body was said to be a stubborn rock with flaws that needed to be polished, then right now, it was like a flawless jade with no flaws to speak of. At this step, he could be considered to have reached the perfection of the sixth transformation of strength path. He made up for the last flaw and had the strength to fight against a cultivator of the third transformation of mortal transformation realm. But at this time, the indescribable thing did not stop. It continued to cross the air and fall into his body, as if it would never stop. If one were to describe it as a vast river before, then it was now nothing more than a trickle of water. It didn't seem like the increase in power was that much, but it had to be known that his power was growing with every passing moment. Even if he didn't deliberately cultivate it, it would only take a few thousand years or even 10,000 years for his magic power to reach a shocking level. After obtaining the root fruit, he finally understood why this indescribable thing could not be found anywhere else. If the world where all living beings were in was the righteous of heaven and earth, then this thing was in the reverse of heaven and earth. It was born and destroyed, but it was everywhere. To them, the world was a piece of nothingness, and they could not reach it no matter what. His body was the anchor of the world, and it could allow him to exist here. As for the heavenly demon essence, it could be summoned. This was because the demon had no physical form and was born from nothingness. It could be used as a bridge to communicate with this thing. But if there was no one who cultivated the divine contract to the fifth transformation or above, it was like one end of the bridge was missing, and it could not reach the other side. He still did not know who the person who created the demon treasury was and what his real purpose was. Perhaps he would only know the answer after he cultivated the divine contract to the seventh transformation. It was useless to think about it now. In the void primordial sea, the skyscraping spirit boat appeared again. Zhang Yan slightly suppressed the qi in his body. Then, he sensed for a while and found that he could still clearly sense that indescribable place. He nodded subconsciously. He could continue to cultivate the divine contract, and perhaps he would have to go there again in the future. Now that the strand of demonic nature was still there, with this guidance, it would be a matter of time to go there. This could actually be considered a protective method. If he encountered someone difficult to deal with, he could escape into this place, and no one would be able to find him. Actually, when he was looking for the root fruit, he could see that there was a continuous stream of supernatural powers that could be comprehended. After cultivating the divine contract to the current level, the attitude of the owner of the demon treasury seemed to have changed. Originally, he only encouraged killing, but now, there was a hint of protection. He guessed that this was probably because there were very few people who could obtain the root fruit since the demon treasury was created, or there was no one at all. Therefore, the owner was not willing to sacrifice it. With a call in his heart, a clear and melodious celestial sound rang out. The 9 deterrence demon taming slip flew out from between his eyebrows and floated in front of him. He touched it and found that the nature of this item had greatly improved, as if it had also experienced an earth-shaking change. Now that he could directly attract the unknown item into his body, it seemed that this item was useless, but in fact, it was still very important and could be said to be indispensable. Not to mention that the subsequent cultivation method might be related to it, but now he could rely on his own root fruit to attract the unknown item. If he used it continuously during the battle, it might expose its location. If he encountered someone with great supernatural power, if he could calculate its location, he might be able to cut off the connection between them. Using the devil taming slip to replenish the qi of vitality, he would not have such concerns. Of course, there was a flaw here. He needed to kill more demons for his use, and it might not be a small number. However, in comparison, this was an easier matter to solve. At this moment in the spiritual boat, everything was as usual. The birds still came to peck at the elixir every once in a while, and there was no difference from before, as if they did not know that they had been to that unknown place. Zhang Yan sensed his surroundings. According to the growth of spiritual vigor, it had only been about half a year. It had not been a long time. Now that his cultivation had increased, he was confident that he had enough power to find the opportunity that Tai Ming Patriarch had passed to him. Zhang Yan sensed the surroundings. According to the growth of spiritual vigor, it was only about half a year, and not a long time had passed. Now that his cultivation had increased, he thought that he had enough strength to find the opportunity passed by Tai Ming Grandmaster. To a Taoist, a year's time was very short, and he did not go into seclusion again, in case something unexpected happened. Xian Hongtian, Mount Luo Monastery's hidden god cave. Venerable One sat in the treasure cave, his eyes closed, and he did not speak or move. Since the change in the mystic stone last time, due to the lack of the key item, the alliance between Xian Hong and Qi Wang could not be discussed. Although the Lords of Heavens who received the gift did not say anything, in reality, Xian Hongtian's reputation had been greatly damaged. He felt that he had let down his sect, and he did not have the face to face He Xianin, so he had been guarding the mystic stone, and would not go out easily. In front of the stone door, a child's voice was heard. Master, Zhenren Yuqing is here to visit. Venerable One sighed. Zhenren Yuqing was his good friend, but it was not convenient for him to go out and meet her at this time, so he said, "Go out and tell her that I do not see outsiders. Please forgive me for not taking good care of her." The child acknowledged and retreated. After a while, he turned back and said, "Master, Zhenren Yuqing has left, but she left this letter here." Venerable One hesitated for a while, but still took the letter. He waved his hand to dismiss the child and then opened it. The letter said that the Feast of Treasures, which was held once in 1,000 years, was coming, and asked his old friend if he wanted to go. He shook his head. The Feast of Treasures was a gathering of heavens, and this time there were 3 hosts, one of which was Qi Wang Tian Lord Han Su. After the incident last time, it was not convenient for him to go as he was from Xian Hong Tian. Moreover, he had no intention of going out, so he wanted to write a letter back to reject the invitation. But just as he was about to do so, he thought of something and pondered for a while, then put the letter away. He called the child over and said, "Go and find out if there is anything happening outside recently." The child responded crisply and left to carry out the order. Venerable One turned back, but when he inadvertently glanced at it, he was shocked. He saw that the mystic stone was trembling slightly, and there was a flicker of spiritual light. He took a few steps forward and looked closely. He said in surprise, "This situation is similar to the last time. Could it be that the person who obtained the fated opportunity is about to arrive?" He observed for a long time, and when he saw that the light never dimmed, he was even more certain of his guess, and his expression became solemn. "Such a big matter, I must inform the sect master." He hurriedly turned and left the cave dwelling. When he was outside, he took out a spell and activated the surrounding restrictive formations to prevent outsiders from coming. Then he hurriedly flew in the direction of Yuntai Heavenly Palace. Chapter 1509. Reeks. One Zhenren came to the cloud platform and invited someone to report. After a short while, the Taoist guarding the platform opened up a path for him and he came to the floating platform. He cupped his hands towards the top and said, "One Rong requests to see sect master." After a while, a majestic clear qi descended from the sky. A Taoist figure that was thousands of feet tall and surrounded by light appeared. It was the headmaster of Mount Luo, Master Xian Hong. Because his real body resided in the sky beyond heaven, he did not usually appear. Only when the sect's reverend asked for an audience or when there was a major event would a clone descend. At this moment, he looked down and said kindly, "Enlightened Master Wan, I heard that you have something important to discuss with me." Enlightened Master Wan bowed again and said, "Headmaster, the Xian stone has moved. Perhaps the fated person that the founding master spoke of is about to arrive at my Xian Hong heaven." Master Xian Hong grunted and said, He should be here. Enlightened Master One said, Headmaster, outside the heavens there is a space-disorienting formation, and there is also the Yuju barrier. There are also the Void Demons and the Jade Kuan guards. Those who do not know the way will have a hard time. Since that person is the person that the founding master wanted me to wait for, should Mount Luo send someone to receive him? Master Xianhong said indifferently, although the founding master ordered us to guard this divine object, he did not want me to protect this person. This might be a test that the founding master left behind. If we were to interfere rashly, wouldn't it go against the founding master's original intention? Enlightened Master One was startled. He hesitated as if he wanted to say something, but when the words were at the tip of his tongue, he could not open his mouth. Master Xianhong looked at him and said, Enlightened Master One, you go first. If that person does not arrive here, it means that he is not the person that the founding master spoke of. Enlightened Master One said yes, bowed to the opposite seat, and retreated. Coming out from the rooftop, he returned to the cave, but his thoughts were heavy along the way. He felt that Guru Xianhong's words made some sense, but since the ancestral master didn't say it explicitly, it would be up to them to decide whether or not they would send people to protect him. Thinking of this, he sighed in his heart, I'm afraid the sect master is still thinking about what happened last time. If this person dies outside, then it's fine. But if he succeeds and comes to my place, and in the future he finds out that Mount Luo didn't help him, it's inevitable that there will be discord. As he was flying, a handsome Taoist with a jade hairpin in his hair came from afar. When this person saw him, his expression was a little surprised. He greeted, Isn't that Jinren Wan? Long time no see. Spiritual Master One heard the voice and stopped. Seeing the person who came, he hurriedly cupped his hands and said, So it's Spiritual Master Song. My apologies. This Spiritual Master Song was of the same generation as Master Xianhong. He was the last disciple of the Upper Heaven Lord. Moreover, one of his sworn brothers was cultivating in the Green Jade Palace and had a high status in the sect. Thus, he did not dare to slight him. Spiritual Master Song came up to greet him. He looked at the rooftop in the clouds, then glanced at him and said, Spiritual Master One seems to have come from the rooftop, but you went to see the sect master. Could it be that the divine object has changed? Spiritual Master One thought about it and felt that there was nothing to hide, so he said, The divine object has moved. I thought that the person that the ancestral master mentioned is coming, so I came to report to the sect master and ask if we should go and receive him. When Spiritual Master Song heard this, his spirit was lifted and he asked, Oh, what did the sect master say? Spiritual Master One smiled bitterly and repeated Master Xianhong's original words. He added, Whether or not he can get past those obstacles depends on this person's fate. When Spiritual Master Song heard this, he revealed an anxious expression, and his voice suddenly rose, The sect master is muddle-headed. Spiritual Master One was stunned. Spiritual Master Song, why do you say this? The sect master has his own considerations, and what he said might not be unreasonable. However, Spiritual Master Song waved his hand and said in a deep voice, Perhaps from the sect master's point of view, even if this matter is known by that person, it is not a big deal. However, how can the person chosen by the ancestral master be so simple? This person is a fellow Taoist of our Luo Mountain Monastery. We can clearly form a good relationship with him, but he chose to do such a thing. Isn't the sect master muddle-headed? Spiritual Master One defended Master Xianhong. Perhaps this person will not be able to reach my Xianhong heaven. Spiritual Master Song snorted coldly and said, If this person cannot get past the obstacles of outer space, then it is the ancestral master's fault. Above that, I am still more willing to believe in the ancestral master. Spiritual Master One was speechless. He sighed and said, Then what do you think we should do? Spiritual Master Song thought for a moment and said, It is not impossible to remedy this. Since the sect master did not say anything about this matter, then let me go and receive this person. Spiritual Master One was startled. Spiritual Master to receive him? Spiritual Master Song said, The sect master did not say that we are not allowed to go. I will sell him a favor now, and it will be easier in the future. Spiritual Master 1 nodded slowly. This was a good idea. Spiritual Master Song had never liked to procrastinate. Once the decision was made, he was about to set off immediately. However, at this moment, an auspicious cloud came over, and on it stood a child. He held a jade book in his hand and said, "Pass down the sect master's order. Recently, to fill up the sect's great formation, everyone must stay in the courtyard and not go out to protect the sect." Spiritual Master Song's expression changed, and his body immediately stopped on the spot. Spiritual Master 1 was also silent. The sect master rarely made mistakes in his actions. It was obvious that he had already calculated that someone might go on their own, so he gave an order to block this path. Spiritual Master Song snorted, flicked his sleeve, and left. He only left behind a sentence, "I will see how the sect master will deal with this in the future." At this moment, in Song Kong Golden Residence, He Xian was hidden in a pure perch Taoist robe. He was standing on the peak of the cliff, playing music with his flute. The melody was slow at first, but then it quickly turned up, and the rhythm suddenly became faster. The aura also became stronger, like a raging wave beating the shore, the wind and clouds surging. Although the surrounding spiritual vigor and clear qi changed with the sound, it was turbulent for a moment. However, halfway through the song, when it was about to reach the climax, it suddenly stopped. He put down the jade flute and said with displeasure, "What's the matter?" The maidservant behind him said in a trembling voice, "Master, the sect master sent an order, saying that the mountain gate's great formation needs to be repaired with a new method. He wants everyone to stay in the sect to protect it and not to go out." He Xian thought for a moment and said, "The great formation has been cleaned 1,000 years ago. Just now, the formation jade is extremely troublesome to repair. It has only been a long time, so there shouldn't be any big changes. The sect master obviously wants everyone to stay in the sect, and he wouldn't do this for no reason. Quickly go and find out why." The maidservant replied timidly, and turned around to find out the news. Not long after, she turned back and reported, "Master, it seems that Spiritual Master 1 just now went to find the sect master, and said that the owner of the divine item that the founding master mentioned is about to arrive, and then this order came." When He Xian heard this, he knew the whole story and said in a calm tone, "Got it." The maidservant bowed and left. He Xian looked up at the sky, and there was a hidden coldness in his eyes. Not to mention that the void beyond the heavens was full of dangers. Without the guidance of a familiar person, it would take a long time. Even the person that the founding master mentioned might not be able to pass through within 1,000 years, and once the agreed time passed, the owner of the mystic stone would no longer be that person. At the same time, in the void primordial sea, after a year's journey, Zhang Yan finally arrived at the place pointed out by the great underworld founding master. However, he found that this place was different from all the void spaces that he had been to before. He could feel that there were layers of obstructions outside the heaven and earth gate, and his divine will constantly deviated to other places. In fact, without the intent left by the founding master, even someone with a similar cultivation as him would not be able to sense that there was another universe behind this. This is a formation set up by a powerful person using innate barriers and acquired methods. It should be to prevent outsiders from entering, and it will be difficult to enter if there is no other way. However, after thinking about it, since there were traces here, it meant that the other party did not block the path completely, and still left some leeway. As long as he found the right place, he could enter. U3, this was not a flaw deliberately revealed by the people of this world, but a way out for himself. Otherwise, the heaven and earth gate would become incomparably sturdy, and it would kill his own people. It was easy to say, but it was actually not easy to do. He could only find it himself. With a slight calculation, this formation did not have much power, but it was very complicated. If he was unlucky, he would probably be delayed for hundreds of years, and even if everything went smoothly, it would still take close to 100 years. Moreover, there were obstacles here, and it was hard to guarantee that there would not be any in the future. The Ziqing great medicine that he had could only last for hundreds of years, and it was impossible to use them all here, so he could only use the remnant jade to deduce. After having a plan, he sat down cross-legged, held the remnant jade, and sank his mind into it. After just over 100 days, he came out on his own. His eyes were shining, and he drove the skyscraping boat towards the formation. If it was said that there was a layer of fog before him, then after unlocking the formation, all of this disappeared, and he could clearly feel the location of the realm pass. He faintly comprehended something. As the saying goes, if the heart is clear, then it will be clear. This should be the method of the person who set up the formation in the past. As long as one knew how to enter and exit the pass, there was no need to deliberately pass through the formation, and to him, this was a smooth road. After he passed through the formation smoothly, he suddenly noticed something strange, and he immediately knew that he'd entered the body of a variant in the void. He'd had a similar experience in the past, so he withdrew the blood essence of the rock, Ingay, and circulated his cultivation technique to shake it. However, it was useless this time. His eyes flashed. Hiding from their own kind was the nature of the void's alien species. Now that there was no movement at all, either this alien species was extremely special, or it had been tamed by someone. What he was facing now was most likely the latter. But no matter which one it was, he would not be able to escape if he used the blood essence of his own kind. If this had happened before he obtained the strength path root fruit, perhaps he would have to spend a lot of effort. Perhaps he would have to put in quite a bit of effort, but it was different at this moment. This spatial variant wasn't superior to him in essence, and he just had to charge through it. However, doing that would bring him more trouble in the end, so it was best to avoid it. Thus, with a thought, the scenery around him shattered in the next moment. The spatial anomaly suddenly disappeared, and the skyscraping spirit boat hovered outside the array formation, unscathed. Just now, everything he experienced was the change in the future that he had seen with his divine will before entering this place. However, this only allowed him to be on guard. Knowing that there was a void creature in front of him, it was not certain that he could avoid it. He silently observed for a moment, and found that he had used up a lot of his divine will. In his heart, he understood that this method could only be used occasionally when facing a beast that was similar to him, and it could not be used as a normal method. Since he knew that there was something strange in front of him, he became especially cautious as he moved forward. When he came over, he did not encounter the void creature again until another strange formation appeared in front of him. To be continued. Chapter 1510. Just as Zhang Yan arrived at the formation, there were two Taoists in Xianhong heaven who were patrolling on the celestial globe. One of the Taoists who was dressed in a golden robe suddenly sensed something. He did not neglect it and pointed at the space between his eyebrows and said in a deep voice, "Junior Brother Quan, someone seems to have passed through the mystification formation." After the person who was addressed as Junior Brother Quan heard it, he sat down for a moment and exclaimed, "There really is someone." He thought for a moment and said, "The Feast of Delicacies is coming soon. Could it be a messenger from another realm?" The Taoist in a golden robe denied it. If that's the case, they would have used a globe to inform us first and not come without notifying us. Maybe it's a cultivator from another realm who accidentally trespassed into our Xianhong heaven. Let me take a look and we'll know. He formed a hand seal and circulated his transcendence energy. After a long time, he raised his sleeve and waved it on the celestial orbit. A ray of spiritual light flashed and a human figure appeared within it. However, the figure was extremely huge and seemed to have no boundaries. Furthermore, the spiritual light seemed to have been seized by the aura. It actually rippled and swayed, making it hard to see clearly. The Taoist in a golden robe took a few glances and exclaimed, "This person's chi dynamic is deep and vast, but it's extremely obscure. Even the celestial globe can't illuminate it, and we can't identify his origin." Junior Brother Quan's expression tightened and said, "Senior Brother, should we inform the sect?" The Taoist in a golden robe shook his head and said, "There's no need for that. This person can pass through the mystification formation and his supernatural power must be very powerful. However, without informing the sect, he definitely won't be able to pass through the mystification formation. Let's just wait for him to pass on his own." There's no need to alarm everyone. Junior brother Quan thought about it and expressed his agreement. Actually, the person was in the void primordial sea and they couldn't do anything even if they wanted to. They could only sit and watch. The sect placed them here to prevent any accidents. Zhang Yan observed for a long time in front of the formation and realized that the formation was a complete mess and it extended into an unknown number of spaces. What he could sense was only the side that could be sensed and he couldn't touch the real thing. This feeling was like walking in front of a reflection. You could clearly see what it was, but if you tried to step over it to find the real thing, then it would immediately shatter, leaving you nowhere to find it. As he pondered, even if he used his divine sense in the void's primordial sea, it could only land on himself and not on the outside. Therefore, it was very likely that the formation and this place were set up with the help of the void creatures. However, this was the place where the great underworld patriarch had pointed out the opportunity, so he could not rule out the possibility of a true young mighty cultivator interfering. It would be extremely difficult to find a loophole. Seeing that he was pacing back and forth outside the array barrier without making any movements, the two Taoists in the celestial telescope smiled. The golden-robed Taoist stroked his beard and said, "It is rumored that the maze barrier of our Xianhong Tian was created by a treasure in the hands of our founding master. Without the permission of the heaven master of our world, no outsider can enter." Junior brother Quan became much more relaxed at this moment. He said optimistically, "I think this person will leave soon." The golden-robed Taoist nodded slowly. Zhang Yan tried a few methods outside, but he could not find the correct entrance. He could not help but think that this array barrier must have something to do with the opening. If he could not enter at all, there was no need for the founding master to leave that trace of thought behind. Thinking about this, he suddenly had an idea. He thought that he could give it a try. If it worked, perhaps it would be very easy to pass the stage. He reached into his sleeve and took out a jade seal. This seal represented his identity as the Duzhen Hall Master of Qinsong School. It was also one of the 3 official seals left behind by the great underworld patriarch when he opened up the small world of the 3 halls and established the orthodoxy of Qinsong School. Holding the seal in his hand, he activated his mana and a clear ray of light shone out. In a trance, he seemed to have touched something. The maze barrier in front of him suddenly disappeared like snow melting under the scorching sun or a curtain of water rolling back. For a moment, there was no longer any cover in front of him, and the void in front of him could be clearly sensed. His eyes flashed. It was just as he thought. Since it was the great underworld patriarch's guidance, he would not deliberately make things difficult for the descendants. With his current identity, he could enter. He had also thought that if it was not him but an ordinary disciple who came here today, even if the disciple had amazing supernatural power, he would not be able to pass. But after thinking about it again, he felt that the arrangement of the founding master was very reasonable. In Qinsong School, only those who sat at the top could obtain enough external things for cultivation. In other words, those with profound cultivation must have had a high enough position in the sect before coming here. Otherwise, how could they cultivate to the upper realm? For example, he had started as a lower house disciple, opened his meridian to become a direct disciple, became one of the top 10 disciples after the inner sect competition, then became one of the top 10 seats, worked his way up to the left hall master of the Duzhen Hall, and finally sat in the main hall. He did not know how many people of the same generation he had killed. Those who were not strong enough were pushed down long ago, and could not reach this step at all. Also, with the original foundation of Qinsong School, to have the qualifications to see the secret method, break through the 12 barriers and complete the mental cultivation method, and at the same time cut off the future body, this could only appear in the sect master and the 2 hall masters, no one else. He put away the jade seal and tried to examine it. He found that this world was different from the void he had seen before. It looked like a nebula, and outside, there were large glass-like koans swimming around. There seemed to be hundreds of them. Although there seemed to be a lot of them on the surface, he could only sense one. The rest of them were the reflections of this large koan, or rather, they were just a part of its body. It was just that those who had not cultivated enough could not see the mysteries within. At this moment, among these jade Kuan, one flew up and circled around the skyscraping spirit boat. Finally, it walked in front of the spirit boat, as if it was leading the way. Zhang Yan thought about it. Back then, Tai Ming Patriarch came here riding the large Kuan Ingui, and he saw another one here. If there was no accident, it should be left by the Patriarch. He cupped his hands in the spirit boat and said, "Thank you, fellow Taoist." A slightly hoarse female voice came, "You don't have to be so polite. How is Inga?" Zhang Yan's heart moved slightly and he said, "Everything is fine." Hearing this, the voice seemed to be very happy and said, "This place is called Xianhong Heaven, and the thing that Exalted True is looking for is here." Zhang Yan nodded and said, "Thank you for telling me, fellow Taoist." As they spoke, the large Kuan had already crashed into the gate of heaven and earth. Seeing this, he also moved the spirit boat forward and instantly passed the gate between the two realms. He followed closely behind and rushed in. Although the two Taoists patrolling in the sky could vaguely see Zhang Yan's figure, they could not completely know what was happening outside because their qi dynamic was not obvious. Originally, they were about to wait for Zhang Yan to leave, but suddenly, they felt a tremor in the gate of heaven and earth, and then the spiritual light on the celestial instrument broke. It was obvious that someone was coming into our realm. Both of them were dumbfounded. The golden-robed Taoist grabbed his beard and said, "How did this person get in? Could he be a cultivator from another branch?" But even if it's someone like that, it's impossible for them to enter our world without being notified. Junior brother Quan hurriedly said, "Senior brother Bai, this is strange. Let's quickly report to the Exalted True." The golden-robed Taoist shook his head and smiled bitterly. "Such a huge commotion, why do we still need to report to the Exalted True? I'm afraid that someone will come later to question me for my negligence." Just as he said, at this moment, all the Exalted True of the Luo mountain lineage immediately sensed it. Rays of grand clear light flew out from their secluded cultivation grounds and into the sky. Taoist Gong's expression was solemn as he looked at the sky. The person who came had not yet entered the realm, but the vast and deep qi dynamic had already descended. However, it was extremely obscure, as if there were endless changes within it, making it impossible for him to determine the specific cultivation level. He said in a deep voice, "There is a formation outside of Xianhong Heaven, and we did not notify in advance. How could someone break through the realm and come here?" Xianyin also arrived at this moment, and he said lightly, "Maybe the person who obtained the ancestral master's fate technique has arrived." Taoist Gong frowned and said, "Who is on duty in Xuantian recently?" A Zhenren answered, "I remember that they are two disciples of Zhenren Bai." Everyone's eyes turned to look at a middle-aged Taoist with a jade-like face and a light beard. The latter slowly said, "They are my disciples. These two people are usually very diligent, so there must be a reason for the mistake today. I'll summon them and ask them, and we'll know." He made a gesture, and after a short while, Xuantian's celestial apparatus flew over. The golden-robed Taoist and junior brother Quan came down from above, and when they came near, they respectfully greeted, "Master, Zhenren True." Zhenren Bai said, "Today, an outsider broke into the realm. Since the two of you are on duty, did you see how the person passed through the mystic barrier outside of the realm?" The golden-robed Taoist hurriedly told the truth about the situation just now. He lowered his head and said, "It is also disciples' negligence. Because the person is not from our realm, I thought that he would not be able to pass through the Yuju barrier. But for some reason, the barrier did not seem to stop this person. He was just in a trance, and he entered the heaven and earth realm pass, and he seemed to be guided by the Jade Kuan." When Zhenren Wan heard this, his expression changed greatly. He raised his voice a little and said, "Zhenren True, to be able to pass through the Yuju barrier laid by the ancestral master, and to be guided by the Jade Kuan, the person must be the owner of the divine object." However, Zhenren Gong said coldly, "Zhenren Wan, be careful with your words. The teachings of the ancestral master are extremely important. Whether the person who came is the owner of the divine object, it is not yet a conclusion. I only know that at this moment, there is an outsider who trespassed into my Xianhong Heaven, And I see that his chi dynamic is obscure, and the technique he practices seems to be very different from the teachings of the ancestral master. His identity, however, is still up for discussion. Jinren Wan frowned and said, "But with the Jade Kuan leading the way, how do you explain this?" Jinren Gong snorted. This was indeed a hurdle that could not be avoided. The Jade Kuan was also left by the great underworld ancestral master back then. The fact that it could guide the person here was enough to prove his identity. In fact, he also knew that what Jinren Wan said was right, but for some reason, he did not want the Xian stone to be taken by the person. At this moment, Jinren Bai said, the ancestral master left behind many other branches, and there are many techniques that we have no way of knowing. Maybe this person is one of them. I'm afraid that the Yu Kun came out to help because they are from the same branch. This kind of thing has happened before, so there is no need to be surprised. In my opinion, it is better to report this matter to the headmaster and let him decide. Chapter 1511. The matter of the Luo Mountain Monastery still needed Guru Xian Hong's decision, so everyone went to the Cloud Sky platform together. However, before they could reach the stage, a Taoist boy came down from above and said, "Esteemed guests, please wait a moment. Old Master has been in seclusion for the past few days and needs to activate the array. He won't be seeing any guests, so please return." Perfected Being Gong asked, "When will the sect master come out?" The Taoist boy replied, "Please forgive me for not knowing." Perfected Being Gong and Perfected Being Bai looked at each other. Guru Xian Hong's attitude was quite thought-provoking, but he probably didn't want to meet the outsiders. One of the perfected beings said, "There are still 10 years before the Yuzhen gathering. The sect master will come out of seclusion. Why don't we wait until then to discuss this matter?" Someone shook his head and said, "The outsiders will have Yu Kuan to receive them. I'm afraid they will arrive within a year and a half, but we won't be able to wait for the sect master to come out." Perfected Being Gong said in a deep voice, "Then let's take advantage of the fact that the perfected beings are here to come up with a plan as soon as possible." Perfected Being Bai thought for a moment and said slowly, "How about this? Since the sect master wants to mobilize the formation, we will close the gate and ignore him. We will pretend that he doesn't exist." Everyone's expressions changed slightly. This could be considered a good plan. The divine object was in their Luo Mountain Monastery after all. They could close the formation or simply seal the mountain. That would be equivalent to cutting off the two sides' paths of communication. If the other party wanted the divine object, they wouldn't be able to find the entrance or the person. If they wanted to come in, they would have to attack the mountain gate. But if this person dared to do so, they wouldn't be polite and would have an excuse to deal with him. Perfected Being Gong denied in a deep voice, "This plan is not appropriate. If that person lures Yu Kuan over to break into the mountain gate, will you stop him or not?" When the perfected beings heard this, they were in a difficult position. Yu Kuan was left behind by the great underworld patriarch. Although he was only a servant, he was closer to the patriarch than they were. If he stood on the side of the intruder, it would be difficult to deal with him. Jinren Gong looked around and said, "Moreover, even if I can keep this person at the door, it's not like there aren't people in the heavens who are my enemies. If news of this gets out and this person uses this person, it will instead bring me great harm." When everyone heard this, they seemed to have thought of something and their expressions changed. Someone immediately said, "That's right. We can't let this person be used by others. We need to make appropriate arrangements." He Xian-in spoke up, "This little brother has an idea." Gong Jinren said, "I wonder what Shidi He's idea is?" He Xian-in said, "We don't have to treat this person harshly, but senior brother Gong said it well. This person's aura is obscure, his background is questionable, but we can't force him to tell us his background. In order to prevent the patriarch's divine object from falling into the hands of evil people, we can set up a few tests to verify his intentions. If this person can do it, he will be one of us. Even if he gets the divine object, we can be at ease." Adept One couldn't help but say, "Then what if you can't do it?" He Xianin said indifferently, "Then that person is not fated with the divine item." Gong Jinren nodded, That's right, if he is not fated, then he will not be the person the patriarch spoke of. You don't have to worry about this, Adept One. Adept One sighed in his heart. The patriarch only told them to guard the mystic stone and wait for the fated person to come, but he never said to set up any tests for the fated person. It wasn't something they should do. But now that Master Xianhong was the leader of Mount Luo, even though he didn't say it explicitly, the meaning was revealed. As a member of the sect, how could he object? It was just that this method was indeed a difficult one for the outsider. Unless this person immediately fell out with Mount Luo and forced his way in, he could only follow their plan. Most of the perfected beings present thought this plan was feasible. After all, the mystic stone was in the hands of Mount Luo. Even if the person was the nominal owner of the object, they could try to delay and set up difficulties. After 1,000 years, there would be no problem. At this time, Adept Bai said, "Here, we need someone to take care of that person." Adept One is calm and is also the person guarding the mystic stone. He is suitable to deal with this person. Gong Zhenren thought for a moment, nodded and said, "Adept One is indeed a suitable person." As he said this, he looked over, but Adept One must remember, don't make any mistakes, otherwise it will be hard to explain to the sect master. Adept One had no choice but to bow and say, "Wan Rong will not disappoint the perfected being's trust." Seeing that he agreed, the perfected beings didn't say anything more. After a few more words, they dispersed. In the end, only Song Zhenren and Wan Rong didn't leave. Song Zhenren looked at the sky and sneered, "I'm afraid that person is not so easy to bully. I'm afraid this method will backfire." Adept One said, "Since Adept Song has a different view, why didn't you say anything just now?" Song Zhenren mocked, "What's the use? Could it be that Adept One can't see that this is the sect master's intention? No matter what I say, it will only annoy people. It's better not to say anything." Adept One sighed and said, "The sect master is also considering for my Luo mountain lineage." Song Zhenren clearly didn't agree with this, but he didn't say anything more about it. He only said, "Adept One, guarding the cave is not a job. It can be said that among us, you are the only one who is burdened by mundane affairs and can't focus on cultivation. Now that you've encountered such a thing, they want to push the blame onto you. If you do well, it's their idea, but if you don't do well, it's your dereliction of duty. Moreover, you've offended that person for no reason. Why did you come?" Adept One's eyes drooped and said, "I'm a cultivator of Luo Mountain, so I have to consider for the sect." Song Zhenren sneered, "They don't care, but you do." Adept One said in a low voice, "The sect seems to be peaceful now, but in reality, there are dangers everywhere. If my fellow disciples aren't worried about this, why are you so anxious about the divine item?" Song Zhenren sneered a few times and said, "Since you are willing, then it's up to you. I'm just being a busybody." He turned around and turned into a ray of light that disappeared into the sky. Adept One knew that since his fellow disciples had handed this matter to him, they would try their best to avoid meeting that person. Because he didn't know when that person would arrive, he simply used his magic power to form a cloud raft and waited here. About 100 days later, a gap suddenly appeared in the sky and a shuttle-shaped boat entered the inner realm. At the same time, a powerful aura filled the sky. The light of the sun and moon seemed to dim a bit. Enlightened Master One stood up from the cloud raft and sensed that the other party's magic power was unfathomable. His heart shuddered as well. He flew up and carefully arrived in front of the spirit boat. He cupped his hands and said loudly, "Fellow Taoist, may I know where you came from and why you came to my Xianhong heaven?" Zhang Yan noticed that although this person's aura was different from that of the Qinsong school cultivators, it was very similar. He knew that this person must be the guardian the great underworld patriarch mentioned. He came out from the boat and bowed back. "I'm Zhang Yan. I'm a cultivator of Qinsong school in the kingdom of 9 continents. I was instructed by my sect's patriarch to come here to find an item." Adept One checked again but didn't feel a similar aura from Zhang Yan. He was confused and asked, "May I ask what fellow cultivator's patriarch is?" Zhang Yan didn't hide it and said, "My Qinsong school's Tao was passed down by the great underworld patriarch." Adept 1 knew he was right and revealed a kind smile. We are indeed from the same sect. I'm Luo Mountain Monastery's Wanrong sect. My sect has long known of fellow cultivators' arrival. However, the sect formation needs to be reorganized, so I was unable to leave. I specially ordered fellow cultivator to wait here. I hope fellow cultivator won't take offense. Zhang Yan smiled. As long as you don't treat I as an unwelcome guest, it's fine. Adept 1 said, not at all. Although my Xianhong heaven has a place in the myriad heavens, it can't compare to those large sections. It's been a long time since we saw a fellow cultivator. I'm very happy to have fellow cultivator come to visit. Zhang Yan raised his eyebrows. Myriad heavens, please forgive I for entering your sect. I don't understand. May I ask where this place is? Adept 1 was slightly surprised. Fellow cultivator, so you came from outside the myriad heavens. I didn't expect there to be a patriarch's Dao inheritance outside of this place. After letting out a sigh, he paused for a moment before continuing. The so-called remnant heavens refers to the various heavens and realms within the Yuluo tribe. There are countless realms of various sizes here. Among them, there are 19 heavens as the supreme, and my Xianhong heaven is one of them. Every heaven realm has a heaven master, and my Luo Mountain sect leader is the heaven master of this realm. Zhang Yan asked, what is the cultivation of your sect master? Adept 1 said, my sect master is at the second tribulation of enlightenment. He's not far from the third tribulation. After a cultivator severed the past and future, if they didn't have the opportunity to reach the true Yang realm, they would find a way to pass the tribulation of enlightenment. Once they passed the tribulation, their magic power would constantly increase. After 30,000 years of cultivation, a tribulation would descend. If they survived it, they would pass the first tribulation. At 60,000 years, another tribulation would descend. This was the second tribulation. At 120,000 years, they would pass the third tribulation. Based on this, they would experience the fourth tribulation after 240,000 years. Every time a cultivator passed a tribulation, their magic power would multiply. As long as they didn't fall under the tribulation, their magic power could be endlessly accumulated. Even so, they would never be able to step into the true Yang realm. Zhang Yan had read Taoist books in his sect and knew about this realm. Those who passed the tribulation of enlightenment couldn't be compared to true Yang cultivators, but they were many times stronger than people like Kong Ying. This Master Xianhong was close to the third tribulation and had cultivated for more than 100,000 years. This kind of magic power could be said to be earth-shattering. Next, he asked about various matters here and Adept 1 answered them one by one. However, he noticed that even though Adept 1 was friendly, he only greeted him as an ordinary fellow Taoist, and he didn't mention a single word about the treasure left behind by the great underworld founding ancestor. It was as if he was intentionally avoiding it. However, he was not in a hurry to investigate. At least, he needed to understand the situation here before he could take the next step. Chapter 1512. While Adept 1 was greeting Zhang Yan, Adept Gong and Adept Bai were standing in a hidden pavilion in the mountain gate. They used the formation to look outside and paid extra attention to the conversation between the two. After hearing Zhang Yan talk about his background, Adept Bai thought for a moment and said, Qinsong School? Have you heard of this sect, Adept Gong? Adept Gong thought for a moment and shook his head. I know of all the branches in the Yuhuan heavens, but Qinsong School has never heard of it. It seems like it is, as he said, he came from outside the Yuhuan heavens. Adept Bai said in a heavy voice, this person's cultivation method is profound and unpredictable. It's difficult to distinguish between the far and the far. It doesn't seem like the path of our generation. Adept Gong agreed and said, that's right. Last time, it already showed that the black stone has a spirit and will choose its own master. However, after this person entered the realm, there was no movement at all. There's clearly something strange about this. It seems that Junior Marshall Brother he is right. We can't be careless about this matter. We need to be cautious to prevent the patriarch's inheritance from falling into the hands of outsiders. Adept Bai said, "That's right. Otherwise, how can we be worthy of the patriarch's trust?" In fact, although the black stone didn't want to be taken by others, it might not take the initiative to find its master. Otherwise, why would the great underworld patriarch send people to guard it? They might as well let it go. They didn't even need the fated person to come here to find it. However, due to some reason, the two of them were unwilling to hand over such a divine object, so they tried to find a reason. Adept Bai said at this moment, "Perhaps we should remind Adept One to try to find out what kind of cultivation method this person cultivates. If he is deliberately concealing it, then there's a big problem with his origin." Adept Gong said with certainty, "Don't worry, Adept One has a sense of propriety on such a big matter. We should know what to do." On the other side, Adept One understood that many of his fellow sect members didn't want to see Zhang Yan come into contact with the divine object, so he didn't welcome him to the mountain gate. Instead, he planned to arrange for him to stay outside the sect. On the way, Zhang Yan had been observing the surrounding scenery. This Xianhong heaven was similar to the mountain and sea realm. The land was boundless, and there were stars, sun, and moon in the sky. However, after talking with Adept One, he found out that in such a big world, there was only one power, the Luo Mountain Monastery. There were some small sects that had deep ties with the lower court courtyards. He nodded and said, "Using one sect to control the heavens, powerful and powerful. Your sect leader is indeed worthy of the title Heavenly Lord." When Adept One heard this, he smiled bitterly and said, "It's just that my Xianhong heaven is not a peaceful place. For example, esteemed Master Wei Ji of Jing Tiantian had a grudge with me because of an incident in his early years. This Heavenly Lord is someone who has passed 3 tribulations, and his cultivation is even higher than the sect leader. Fortunately, there is a formation outside Xianhong Heaven and the Jade Kuan Guard, so he can't enter. However, if fellow Taoist goes to the outer world in the future and meets cultivators from this world, you must be careful." In fact, with the Jade Kuan bewildering formation outside Xianhong Heaven, the Luo mountain lineage had no fear of external enemies. Not to mention the fact that they were here under the orders of the great underworld patriarch to guard the Xian stone, no one would dare to offend the patriarch and make things difficult for them. It was precisely because of this that the cultivators in the sect had always been very tough when dealing with outsiders. But then again, once the Xian stone was taken away, it was equivalent to announcing that their duty to guard it was over, and from then on, the two parties would no longer have anything to do with each other. But for the past million years, this divine object had long been their protective talisman. If it was suddenly gone, who knew how many enemies would appear, and it was very likely to cause a disaster. If they wanted to avoid it, they had to have a powerful cultivator, or use this object to form an alliance with a strong enough external help. They had long planned for this. Jiwang Tian Lord He Xianyin was someone who had passed 3 tribulations and was close to passing 4. If the two parties formed an alliance, then they would no longer have to worry about these things. Moreover, with the help of the Xian stone, He Xianyin would be able to take that unprecedented step. But the arrival of Zhang Yan had completely disrupted their plans. Zhang Yan originally wanted to try and ask about the reason for the enmity between the two parties, but Venerable Wan's words were vague. He knew that Venerable Wan was unwilling to talk about it in detail. His eyes flickered slightly. Although there was no clear proof, he could feel that this matter was definitely related to the opportunity left behind by the great underworld patriarch. Thus, he did not pursue the matter any further. He smiled and said, "May I ask who has the highest cultivation in the Yuhuan all heavens?" Enlightened Master Wan replied, "In terms of cultivation, Tao, and cultivation, the Palace Master of the Green Jade Palace is the highest. This senior almighty had already obtained the fruit of Tao long before our heavens were divided and achieved the true Yang realm." Zhang Yan nodded inwardly when he heard this. There was indeed such a person in the all heavens. Venerable One then said, "Every 10,000 years, the Palace Lord of Emerald Jade Palace will hold a sermon. As long as one's cultivation has reached a certain level, they can go and listen to the sermon. At that time, not only our generation, but even the all heavens heaven lords will be present. It is one of the 3 great events of our Yuhuan all heavens. When Zhang Yan heard this, his interest was piqued. He asked, "May I know what are the other 2 great events?" Venerable One replied, "The other 2 great events are the Pearl Scattering Banquet and the Feast of Treasures. The Pearl Scattering Banquet is used to promote talented people of the younger generation. The host of this banquet is the Heaven Lord of Yehatian, Ao Shao. This Heaven Lord is a true dragon that achieved Tao. It is rumored that he was the mount of a certain great virtue, and even the Palace Lord of Emerald Jade Palace is very polite to him. As for the Feast of Treasures, it is different. It is set up to make it convenient for the cultivators of the all heavens to exchange treasures and external medicines. You can find any precious treasures there. Fellow Taoist has come at the right time. The day of the Feast of Treasures is approaching, and it will only take a few hundred years at most. Fellow Taoist should go and take a look when the time comes. Perhaps you will be able to gain something." Zhang Yan smiled and nodded. "Since it is a all-heavens event, I must go and take a look if I have time." The 2 of them talked for a long time. Venerable One felt that he had become more familiar with Zhang Yan. He pondered for a while and asked tentatively, "May I know which technique did you cultivate from the ancestral master?" After saying that, he quickly added, "If it is not convenient, just pretend that I never asked." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "There's nothing I can't say. There are many techniques passed down by the ancestral master, and all of them are profound and mysterious. However, my aptitude is average, so it's difficult for me to comprehend more. I've only cultivated one of them, and it's called the 9 Numbers Taishur Spiritual Treasure Mystic True Scripture. I wonder if fellow Taoist has any?" "Oh, it is the 9 Numbers True Scripture?" After hearing this, Venerable One's eyes unconsciously widened. He looked at Zhang Yan with a trace of admiration and said with emotion, "No wonder you came to my Xianhong heaven. This scripture is not something that ordinary people can cultivate. It must be known that although some techniques are extremely superior, they may not be very compatible with the person who cultivates them. When one first enters the path of cultivation, one may not feel anything, but once one cultivates to a high level, one's progress will be very slow and it will be difficult to move forward. This is because one has gone astray from the beginning, and later on, they will deviate further and further. At this point, it will be impossible to turn back and recultivate. If one can comprehend the 9 Numbers True Scripture early on, then one can deduce the cultivation method. This way, it will be more compatible with one's body, and there will be no need to worry. However, this cultivation technique was not that easy to cultivate. It was not that no one in the Xianhong Tian sect had tried it in the past, but most of their achievements were extremely limited. In the Luo Mountain Monastery, other than passing down the 9 Numbers True Scripture, the great underworld patriarch had also left behind more than 10 mysterious techniques. Since there was a better choice in front of him, why should he take this rugged path? As a result, over time, this method was no longer of interest. Venerable One was amazed. This person can cultivate this technique? How is his talent mediocre? He is clearly a genius. Thinking about it, how can a person who can obtain the opportunity left behind by the patriarch be simple? Perhaps it is because of this that the patriarch values him. When Zhang Yan saw that they were talking about this topic, he also took the opportunity to ask about the cultivation technique of the Luo Mountain Monastery in detail. However, he found that there were no 3 scriptures here, and all he knew was the 9 Numbers True Scripture. Although there are many other cultivation techniques, most of them are of the water attribute, completely unlike the Qinsong school, which has all 5 skills. He vaguely realized that this sect probably did not obtain the true inheritance of the patriarch. The 2 of them chatted along the way, and not long after, they arrived at a beautiful island that was surrounded by mountains and faced the sea. Outside the island, there were many dragons soaring in the clouds and swimming in the sky. The tide below was high, like hills rising out of the water. The waves surged over, causing jade waves to splash, and from time to time, a rainbow-colored ring of light could be seen. Venerable One said, "This is Starry Rainbow Island, a place where my Xianhong Tian welcomes our distinguished guests. I wonder if fellow Taoist is satisfied?" Zhang Yan glanced over and saw that this place was rich with spiritual opportunity. It was a good place to cultivate, but he knew that the so-called distinguished guest in his words was just a joke. If the Luo Mountain Monastery really valued his arrival, then they should at least welcome him inside the monastery, and blocking the door was not proper etiquette. However, he had no intention to fuss about this, so he smiled and said, "This place is very good, thank you, fellow Taoist." Venerable Wan's heart relaxed, and he said, "Then, fellow Taoist, please rest here for the time being. I need to report your arrival to the sect. I'll come and visit you again in a few days." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "Do as you wish, fellow Taoist." Venerable Wan bowed, then turned around and flew into the sky. Zhang Yan descended and landed in the pavilion on the peak. Suddenly, there was a flash of light, and a spirit appeared. It was a middle-aged scholar, and he said respectfully, "I'm the manager of this place. Do you have any orders, esteemed guest?" Zhang Yan glanced at him and said, "You heard that fellow Taoist one once said that you have a heavenly local annals here. Can I have a look?" The middle-aged scholar hesitated, but he did not dare to refuse and said, "Yes, I'll go get it now." After the person left, Zhang Yan looked at the sky. From the moment he entered the world, he felt that someone was spying on him. He smiled faintly, and with a wave of his sleeve, a ball of qi surged and covered his figure. At the same time, Venerable Gong and Venerable Bai felt their vision blur, and they could no longer see anything. They frowned unconsciously. Venerable Gong said in a deep voice, "This person's qi is obscure, it's really hard to see through." Venerable Bai said, "No matter how capable he is, as long as we follow Venerable He's method and set up a few tests, he will naturally reveal himself." Venerable Gong looked over and said, "Oh, Venerable Bai, do you have an idea?" Venerable Bai chuckled and said, "There's no harm in doing this first." He transmitted his voice over, and Venerable Gong repeatedly nodded and said, "All right, we'll do as Venerable Bai says first." Chapter 1513. After Spiritual Master One returned to the treasure cavern, he went to the depths of the cave and looked at the profound stone. He saw that the light on it was even brighter than before, and it would buzz and tremble from time to time. He couldn't help but have a complicated expression, and he sighed. If you escape to find the owner just like this, then the fellow Taoists in the sect won't have to worry about you anymore. After he finished speaking, he saw that the profound stone was still quietly floating there without any movement. He felt slightly disappointed in his heart, but at the same time, he heaved a sigh of relief. He sat down cross-legged and sat there motionlessly as usual. After an unknown amount of time, a boy's voice came from outside the cave. Master, Gong Shangzhen and Bai Shangzhen sent a disciple over. They said they'd like to invite Master over for a chat. Spiritual Master One said, "I understand. Tell them I'll go in a moment." He stood up, and before he left, he once again inspected the restrictions in this place. This array could only block the outside but not the inside. It could not restrict the divine objects in any way, but outsiders without his permission and the headmaster's decree would absolutely not be able to enter. He walked to the outside and boarded a flying carriage. He went into the profound room and sat down on the jade couch, letting the driver in front of him ride on the cloud. Not long after, the flying carriage shook slightly, and the driver said, "Shangzhen, we've arrived at the earth boundary." Spiritual Master One got up and came out, but he had already arrived on an island in the clouds. The cloud cranes flew away, and clear sounds could be heard. Looking down, the land was boundless and incomparably vast. In comparison, this place was like a drop in the ocean. However, this floating island was actually very large. There were 5 mountains, 8 lakes, and more than 100 temples on it. The people who lived there were all disciples and clansmen of this line under Spiritual Master Bai. At this moment, a cultivator in embroidered robes was already standing there to welcome them. He took a few steps forward, bowed, and said, "Shangzhen Wan, please come in. My master and Gong Shangzhen are waiting inside." Spiritual Master One said, "Lead the way." The embroidered robed cultivator immediately led the way, leading them all the way to a mountain gorge with clear spring water and warm mist flowing from it. Gong and Bai, two people, were sitting on a green lotus leaf. A golden incense burner was emitting dense mist. Between the water and the sky, auspicious clouds were faintly discernible, giving off the demeanor of an immortal. Seeing Spiritual Master Wan's arrival, the two smiled and stood up to greet him. Then, Spiritual Master Bai made a hand seal, and a lotus leaf floated over, inviting him up. The founders of these sects either listened to the Tao under the Patriarch, or were the registered disciples of the Patriarch, or simply obtained the cave abode that the Patriarch left behind when he traveled the Yuhuan heavens. If one looked closely, they couldn't be considered as a proper inheritance. And in the local records, the Xinhong Heaven Luoshan Monastery said that they were the Orthodox sect, and called the rest of the sects as a side branch. Although it was slightly contemptuous, it was not completely nonsense. It also had some confidence. After all, whether it was the sects or the techniques, they were all passed down by the great underworld patriarch. Compared to the other sects, they could indeed be considered orthodox. However, he also found a problem here. All the sects that obtained the inheritance would try to state their own master. This was something that could not be ignored. For example, the orthodoxy passed down by Venerable Sun Yu was like this. However, the Luoshan Monastery was very secretive about this, as if they didn't want others to know. Regarding this, he couldn't help but have a guess in his heart. He needed to find a way to verify it in the future. If he used it well, it might be a breakthrough point. In the blink of an eye, another few days passed. On this day, when he was holding a demon mirror in his hand, the formation spirit suddenly appeared, bowed, and said, "Venerable Wan is here." Zhang Yan put down the book and said, "Please come in." Not long after, Venerable Wan slowly walked in, and after coming up to greet them, they each sat down. He said, "I have already reported your arrival to the sect, but I have to ask one thing. You said that you came under the guidance of the Patriarch, but what did the Patriarch say?" Zhang Yan smiled faintly and said, "Without the permission of the Patriarch, please forgive I for not being able to tell others." Venerable Wan bowed and said, "I have been rude." He pondered for a while and said, "I won't hide it from you. We have been guarding this item for nearly 1,000,000 years under the orders of the Patriarch, and we have never seen anyone come to take it. Although our knowledge of you is limited, we can't just hand it over with a few words. That would be letting down the Patriarch's trust." Zhang Yan glanced at him and said with a smile, "Then what do you want?" He didn't believe that outsiders could take away the item passed down by the great underworld Patriarch. Even if he didn't talk about Yukuan's attitude towards him, as long as Mount Luo Monastery was willing to open the mountain gate and let him in for a little contact, it wouldn't be hard to come up with a conclusion. However, this person didn't mention this method at all, and instead looked for excuses. It was obvious that he didn't want to take it out. However, he already knew this and also had a way to deal with it, so he didn't say it out loud. Venerable Wan said, Venerable Wan, we don't want to make things too difficult for you. We just want to ask you to do a few things to test your sincerity. If you succeed, we will naturally hand the item over to you." Zhang Yan said, "What kind of things?" Venerable Wan said, "The first thing is that there's a place in my Black Flood Tianxia realm called Mount Klayan. There's a fierce demon that's entrenched there and often comes out to wreak havoc in the human world. However, he's skilled in escape techniques and seems to have the ability to predict the future. Every time someone tries to capture him, he escapes first. Can I ask you to eliminate him on my behalf?" As he spoke, he raised his head and looked over. There was actually a hidden trap here. Mount Klayan looked like a fierce demon on the surface, but only the upper echelons of Mount Luo Monastery just now knew that he was the adopted son of Venerable Guanji who had accumulated years of victories. This was a nail that Venerable Guanji had deliberately buried here. If not for this, how could the dozen or so Venerable Luo Monastery fail to capture him? They just didn't want to give this person an excuse, so they allowed him to roam freely in the lower realm. But if Zhang Yan took action, it would be different. He wasn't from Mount Luo, so he naturally had a way to prevent Venerable Guanji from blaming them. Zhang Yan smiled and said, "This demon must have some ability to survive under the noses of your esteemed sect for so long. I can't promise you before I know the details of this demon." Venerable One said, "That's a matter of course. I'll order someone to send over all the information regarding this demon later." Gong and Bai had long considered this. If Zhang Yan wasn't willing to agree, then they could use this as an excuse to withhold the profound stone. If they agreed and succeeded, it would be beneficial to them. Moreover, Zhang Yan had unknowingly offended Venerable Guanji, and his life would be in danger. Even if his luck was good and he successfully passed this trial, this wasn't the end. There was still the next trial waiting for him, and one after another, he wouldn't be able to take the stone away. Zhang Yan nodded and said, "After I read it, I will give you an answer." Venerable One said good, paused, and then said, "This matter isn't urgent. You can slowly consider it." After a few more words, he took his leave. After seeing him off, Zhang Yan began to ponder. He didn't need to guess to know that there must be something wrong. The other party had set up a trap for him to jump into, so he needed to be extra cautious when dealing with this matter. It was a pity that the great underworld patriarch had only instructed him to take the divine object, and there was nothing that could directly prove his identity. Otherwise, he could just take the object and leave. If the Luo Mountain Monastery didn't want to betray the patriarch, they couldn't stop him. However, even if there was such an object, it wasn't suitable to take it out at this time. He deduced that the object left behind by the patriarch was probably related to the path of true yang. Even if he obtained it now, he wouldn't be able to use it immediately. Instead, it would attract people's attention. Instead of that, it was better to leave it in the Luo Mountain Monastery and let it be safeguarded for him. He might as well use the external medicine spiritual opportunity here and the experience of the predecessors to find a way to improve his cultivation and strengthen himself. As for how to obtain the object, he already had a plan in mind. However, the time wasn't right yet, so he had to wait patiently. Chapter 15-14. Inside the pavilion, Zhang Yan pondered for a while, then took out a jade tablet with a glossy surface from his sleeve. He lifted it up, and it floated up under the support of the clear air. He then took out a jade mallet and struck it. With a buzzing sound, a layer of jade-colored light like a cocoon spread out in all directions, and in an instant, the entire hall was shrouded in light. He raised his hand and flicked his fingers at the light cover. Rays of clear light shot out, and every time the light hit, a talisman pattern would appear on it, flowing and flickering on its surface. This was a concealment instrument that he brought from the sect to prevent outsiders from peeping. The more Fa-li he sent in, the more talisman there would be on it, and the tighter the defense would be. It was not convenient for the people of the Luo Mountain Monastery to know what he was going to do, so he had to make such an arrangement. However, if there was a true young almighty who wanted to peep, then he would not be able to guard against it. However, there was no need for such a person to keep an eye on him. Moreover, there was a great underworld patriarch's arrangement outside Xianhong Heaven, so it was not easy to break in. After about 1,000 talisman patterns, he felt that it was enough, so he stopped. He took out the dual realm dial and pressed it with his hand. However, this time, the instrument only trembled slightly, and the spiritual light on it seemed to be blocked by an invisible barrier. It only flickered slightly, but could not appear as usual. He nodded as he had expected this. He took out the Duzhen Hall Master's jade seal and activated it slightly. In an instant, the invisible force retreated like a receding tide, and the spiritual light that was originally suppressed also gushed out. After a while, Sect Leader Qin's figure appeared and gradually became clearer. Zhang Yan bowed and said, "Greetings, Sect Leader Spiritual Master." Sect Leader Qin looked at him up and down, then nodded and said with a pleasant expression, "Did Hall Master Duzhen's trip back go smoothly?" Zhang Yan replied, "I followed the Patriarch's instructions and successfully arrived at the place where the opportunity is." Next, he told Sect Leader Qin about the situation in the Yuhuan Heavens, and emphasized that Luo Mountain Monastery had set up obstacles to make it difficult for him to touch the divine object. Finally, he said, although Luo Mountain Monastery claims to have inherited the patriarch's teachings, the inheritance is vague and the lineage is unclear. I think I can find a loophole here. Sect leader Qin thought for a moment and said, no matter which sect, the teachings of the master are extremely important. It has always been stated clearly, and there is no reason to be vague. This person claims to be a disciple of the great underworld patriarch. If he does not want others to know, then it is either the patriarch intentionally, or the origin is unclear, and the name is not clear. Zhang Yan said, everyone knows that Luo Mountain Monastery is guarding the divine object for my patriarch, and this person also uses this name to intimidate everyone, and claims to be an orthodox sect. If this is really the case, then it should have been publicized long ago, and there is no need to hide it. Therefore, I think that this person is just faking this name, and I need to find an opportunity to verify it. For any sect, if the name of the patriarch was faked, or if the person was clearly not an orthodox disciple, but still insisted on clinging to the patriarch, then all the successors in the heavens and realms would have the right to ask for an explanation. Sect leader Qin said, what does Hall Master Du Zhen want to do? Zhang Yan replied, I want to propose paying respects to the patriarch at the right time, and I hope sect leader Qin will grant me this right. If he refuses, then he is definitely not a disciple of the patriarch, and this person has no right to stop me. Asking to open an altar to pay respects to the patriarch was not something that could be done by just anyone. It had to be a disciple of the orthodox sect, and what was the orthodox sect? The legacy was passed down, and the inheritance was continuous. There was a record of each generation, and the order of seniority was also traceable. In Qinsong school, only the sect leader Zhenren had this right, but he was one of the 3 hall masters, and if he had the sect leader's permission, he could also do this. Sect leader Qin thought for a moment, and said with a slightly solemn expression, I approve this request. From now on, if Hall Master Du Zhen meets someone whose inheritance is unclear, but who falsely claims to be a disciple of the patriarch, then you can open an altar to set up a sacrifice, and there is no need for another report. Zhang Yan bowed and said, Disciple thanks sect leader Qin for his trust. After a few more words of discussion, he ended the conversation with sect leader Qin, and put away the 2-realm dial again. Once the right to open an altar to pay respects to the patriarch was in his hands, it was equivalent to holding a big killer move. Once it was proven that the Luo Mountain sect was not a descendant of the great underworld patriarch, then the so-called test would be unreasonably difficult. How could a sect that was not even a branch have the right to order a disciple of the orthodox sect? However, if this was really done, it would also force the Luo Mountain sect into a corner. After all, the patriarch was powerful, and it was on his own territory. Even if he was stripped of his bright coat, there would always be a way to deal with him. Therefore, unless there was no other way, he was not ready to take this step. Now he was thinking that since the situation could not be solved from the inside, then he would try to find a way from the outside. The reason why the Luo Mountain sect dared to set obstacles for him was that he had just arrived, had no foundation, and was not strong enough. The power he could use was very limited, and even if he turned hostile, he would not be too much of a threat to them. But if he could make a name for himself in the heavens and have the help of all his fellow Taoists, then when the time came and talked to them about obtaining the divine object, it would be enough to put great pressure on them, and his chances of success would be much higher. At least, they would not dare to randomly find such flimsy excuses to obstruct him. To achieve this, he could not be bound by the rules of the Luo Mountain sect, nor could he follow the path arranged by them. Instead, he had to find a way to go out, either to visit or to make friends. For example, the sects related to the great underworld patriarch were natural allies with him. This generation had never been favored by the Luo Mountain sect and was often criticized by the Luo Mountain sect for being a branch. But as a true disciple, he could communicate with them, and if necessary, he could even give them talismans and gold discs to bring them into the Qinsong faction. In this way, he could straighten out their name. In addition, if he wanted to achieve his goal, he had to do something that was worthy of praise from all heavens. A few days ago, when he was reading the annals of all heavens, he discovered something interesting. Just as Taoist one had said, the Yuhuan heavens was not a place of peace. There were many demons and devils, many of which were on the same level as the mountain and sea realm's ghost ancestor. As a power that stood above all heavens, the Green Jade Palace would often send out edicts to various sects or people with profound cultivation bases to exterminate these demons. Because these edicts targeted demons the most, the people of all heavens called them the Demon Extermination Edicts. As long as the cultivators who received the edicts completed the task mentioned in the edicts, the Green Jade Palace would reward them handsomely. However, the higher the reward, the more dangerous it would be. Sometimes, because the demons and devils were too powerful, cultivators from several sects would need to join forces. Just now, they dared to go. Over the past million years, there had been many orthodox sects that had been destroyed due to failure. On the other hand, if something that seemed impossible was suddenly accomplished by someone, then that person would immediately enter the eyes of the various forces, and their reputation would even be praised in the all heavens. For example, He Xianyin from Mount Luo Monastery. He had severed his past and future body after cultivating for 3,000 years, but at first no one knew about it. After all, it was impossible for Mount Luo Monastery to publicize this matter, as it would be suspected of boasting and showing off. Later, because he received a demon extermination edicts, he used a stratagem to kill a fierce demon that was extremely difficult to deal with. Only then did his name spread throughout the heavens, and he was praised by everyone. Speaking of which, it was also thanks to this person that the records of the demon subduing edict were so detailed. Xian Hongtian had always had few juniors who were well known outside. Now that such a person had appeared, how could it not be noted? What Zhang Yan planned to do, apart from making friends, was to choose this place as the next breakthrough point. Unfortunately, there was no detailed description of the demon extermination edicts, and there were no written records of the past. If one wanted to read it, he would have to go to the Qinghua Heaven under the Green Jade Palace. Once there, he would be able to get a glimpse of it. However, if he wanted to go there, he would first have to find someone who was familiar with the way. Different realms had different rules. If there was a misunderstanding because he was not clear about it beforehand, it would cause some unnecessary trouble. Although his cultivation was so high that he could ignore most of the restrictions and customs, and he was not afraid of offending people, if he respected others, they would respect him in return. Everything could be solved in a certain way, so he should try his best to do it. If he took a detour, even if he succeeded, it would be easy for others to criticize him. After sorting out these thoughts, he sat down with his legs crossed. No matter what choice he made in the future, he still had to rely on his own strength. The higher his cultivation, the more choices he could make, and the easier it would be for him to do things. With a thought, he activated his demonic nature and communicated with that side of the world. Suddenly, he disappeared from the pavilion, and when he reappeared, he was already in the land where he found the strength Tao root fruit. Looking at the world in front of him that was filled with scarlet rocks, he thought, looks like it's not bad. Even in the Yuhuan heavens, I can still travel to this red land. This time, he did not use the seal passed down by the great underworld patriarch, but he was able to pass through the formation barrier and enter this place without any obstruction. This was enough to show how powerful the master behind the devil treasury was. After finding the strength Tao root fruit, even if he did not deliberately cultivate, his magic power would increase at any time. If he cultivated here, the speed would naturally increase a lot. If he wanted to improve further, there was another way, and that was to find demons, and he could refine as many as he could find. The world is divided into clear and turbid, and the Yuhuan heavens is so big, it's impossible that there are no places where demons gather. There are indeed a few strange and dangerous places in the local records, but most of them are not detailed. If I can go to the Qinghua heavens this time, I have to pay more attention to these places. This time, he was only trying to see if he could escape here. The Wanjin people could come at any time, so he did not stay for long before turning back. He landed in the pavilion again. He looked around, and with a shake of his sleeve, he put away the concealment magic tool and walked out. Chapter 15:15. In front of the pavilion, a servant boy saw Zhang Yan coming out and bowed, saying, "Shang Zhen, just now, there's a jade letter delivered to you, asking for Shang Zhen to take a look." Zhang Yan stopped in his tracks and said, "Let me take a look." The servant boy quickly took out the jade letter, bent over, and placed both hands on top of it. Zhang Yan took it and opened it. It was a letter of greeting, and at the end of it, it was written, Song Wei. These days, not only did he read the local records, he also tried to understand the Luo Mountain Monastery that he was about to deal with. This Song Wei was one of the 10 Shangzhen of the monastery under the sect master, and he had also cultivated to the second stage, a cultivator who had cut off his past body. He suddenly had a feeling that this person might be of help to him, so he took out a jade talisman from his sleeve and handed it to him, saying, "Send this talisman to fellow Taoist Song's abode. If he comes, quickly report to me." The servant boy said respectfully, "I'll remember." Zhang Yan waved his sleeve and dismissed him. He then walked to the front of the pavilion. There was a clear stream here, and there were many beautiful flower petals drifting down from the upper reaches. If that was all, it would be normal. Every petal had an inscription carved on it, but the content was obscure, making it impossible for anyone to understand its meaning. He looked up and saw a tall mountain. The peak of the mountain was shrouded by a ball of hazy clouds. With his cultivation, it was easy for him to force his way through, but since he was here as a guest, it was not appropriate for him to do so. Thus he said, "Men." There was a flash of light, and the array spirit appeared, bowed and said, "Shangzhen, do you have any orders?" Zhang Yan raised his sleeve and pointed upwards. "What's the upper reaches of this place?" The formation spirit took a look and replied, "Shangzhen, this place used to be the yard of a spiritual master with the surname Luan. However, this spiritual master didn't have any descendants. Back then, he only kept some strange monsters that were captured from the outer world. After the spiritual master reincarnated, these strange monsters stayed here for his sake. Over the years, they have all died off. Only an old bull named Crooked Horse is still there. Because it is honest, the immortal masters in the sect let it live out its retirement here. If it disturbs Shangzhen, I will teach it a good lesson or drive it out." Zhang Yan was slightly moved as he asked, "In that case, this old bull isn't from Xianhongtian?" The formation spirit replied, "Yes." Zhang Yan nodded and took another look at the clouds on the mountain peak. His gaze was deep and profound. He didn't ask any more questions and admired the beautiful scenery along the river for a while before returning to the pavilion to cultivate. On the second day, the child came to report that Spiritual Master Song had arrived. Zhang Yan ordered, "Invite Spiritual Master Song in." After the boy left to pass on the order, he sat for a while and then came out of the hall. He came to the door of the hall and waited for a while. Soon he saw a handsome Taoist with a jade hairpin in his hair walk in. Zhang Yan raised his hand and bowed, "This must be Taoist Song, I greet you." Spiritual Master Song looked at him and bowed back, "I dare not, Taoist Zhang is greeting me." Zhang Yan smiled and turned around, "Taoist, please come in and talk." The two entered the room and sat down. The formation spirit came up to serve them tea. Taoist Song waited for the teacup to be set up. He picked it up and took a sip before putting it down. He said, "I came here to say one thing." His gaze focused on Zhang Yan's face. "Fellow Taoist, you really shouldn't have come here." Zhang Yan's expression was normal as he said, "Oh, why do you say that? Can you tell me the reason?" Spiritual Master Song stared at him and said, "Do you know that before you came, the sect was preparing to use the divine item to make a fuss? Our sect's spiritual master, he could have used it to reach the sky in one step and our Luo Mountain Monastery could have avoided a calamity. But because of you, this plan didn't come to fruition. Our Luo Mountain Monastery might even have gained an enemy because of this. If that's the case, how would the people of our Luo Mountain Monastery be willing to hand over the divine item to you?" Zhang Yan smiled and said, "If not for this, would you have smoothly handed the divine item to I?" Spiritual Master Song chuckled and said with a hint of self-mockery, "I don't think they were willing. After all, they've guarded it for millions of years and have long regarded it as their own." He stood up and said, There are many pros and cons to this. You're only one person after all. Don't let this delay you. After saying that, he cupped his hands and said no more. He turned around and left. Zhang Yan sent him off with a pensive look on his face. He could see the true intentions of this person. He was clearly here to advise him, but in reality, he was deliberately revealing a lot of information to him. However, why did he do this? This was something worth pondering. It was very likely that this information was not difficult to obtain. Even if the other party did not tell him, he would learn about it sooner or later. However, the significance of being informed in advance was different. If he feared the power of Mount Luo Monastery and wanted to retreat, there would naturally be less conflict. But if he had some means to force the Mount Luo Monastery to submit, or if the two sides were to fight in the future, it could be considered as leaving him some face here in advance. However, he had already made up his mind. No matter what the other party did, as long as they did not openly fight, it would not affect him much. After thinking about it, he waved his sleeves, got up, and returned to the inner chamber. He continued to meditate. A few days later, while he was sitting and observing, he suddenly sensed something. His eyes flashed, and a cloud of mist suddenly flew in from outside. He saw a strange face rushing left and right, but no matter how hard he tried, he could not get out. Seeing that the mist was shrinking, the strange face revealed a look of panic and begged for mercy. "Please spare me, please spare me. I have no ill intentions. I'm only here to deliver a letter." Zhang Yan made the mist dissipate a little and said calmly, "Who are you, and who are you delivering the letter for?" The ghost face said, "Please forgive me for not knowing your name, master. I was ordered to come here to tell you something." Zhang Yan did not say anything, but looked at it calmly. The ghost face quivered, and did not dare to hesitate. The space between its eyebrows opened, and a curtain of light shone down, on which many words flashed. Zhang Yan looked at it. It was talking about what spiritual master Song had said not long ago, but it was more detailed, and the cause and effect were clearly explained, as if everything had happened personally. After the ghost face released the light, its eyes became dull. When the light faded, its body trembled, and turned into green smoke. In a few breaths, it completely disappeared, leaving no trace from beginning to end. Zhang Yan did not do anything. This was an arrangement made by the owner of the letter. This person's skills were not weak, and there were only a few people in Xianhong Heaven who could do such a thing. As for the purpose, there were too few clues, and it was still unclear. He thought to himself, so Mount Luo Monastery originally arranged for He Xianyin to be Taoist companions with the heavenly daughter of Zhiwang, and the two of them would work together on the divine item. This way, even without the title of guarding the divine item, with heavenly daughter of Zhiwang as an ally, they could still ensure the peace of Xianhong Heaven. If He Xianyin was lucky enough to achieve something with this item, there would be no need to fear external enemies. This was a good plan, but it was a pity that he was not the fated person like the founding master said, and was destined to not get the item. Otherwise, the mystic stone would not have returned to its owner after it was taken out. Spiritual Master Song had mentioned He Xianyin previously, and did not mention the matter with heavenly daughter of Zhiwang. It seemed that they were from the same sect, and so he stopped there. While he was thinking, the child outside the door said, "Shangzhen, Wanzhen is here." Zhang Yan raised his head and said, "Please come in." Not long after, Venerable One walked in. After greeting him, Venerable One sat down and handed him a jade slip. He said, "This contains all the records related to Mountain Lord Che Yen. Venerable One can take a look." Zhang Yan accepted it, glanced at it, and put it to the side. He said with a smile, "I heard that you want to do a few things for I, but I don't know how many. Can you give me a specific number so that I can have a plan?" This, Wanzhen Jinren could not help but hesitate. Mount Luo Monastery had come up with these excuses to make things difficult for Zhang Yan. But if they were to give an accurate list of the specific things, and if the spiritual master really succeeded, then wouldn't they be trapped in a cocoon of their own making? This was not his groundless worry. Zhang Yan was a fated person who was guided here by the great underworld patriarch. Who knew if he had some powerful tricks up his sleeves? Seeing his troubled appearance, Zhang Yan became even more certain of his judgment. He smiled and said, "If it's not possible, it's fine. I was just asking casually." Wanjin Junren sighed in relief, cupped his hands, and said, "Thank you for your understanding, fellow Taoist. There are some things that I cannot decide on my own." He paused, then said, "But when I return, I will think of a way to convince my fellow sect members and give you a definite answer." Zhang Yan's expression was carefree. He said, "It's fine. In a few days, it's very likely that I will go to the hiding place of that vicious demon to investigate. It's just that I'm not one of your people, so it's inconvenient for me to come and go. Do you have a letter of communication with me?" Wanjin Junren was very generous this time. He said, "I've already prepared it for you." He took out a jade disc from his sleeve and handed it over. Zhang Yan took the jade disc and looked at it a few times. Wanjin Junren had given it to him so easily. This item was probably not as simple as a letter of communication. It also had the function of monitoring his whereabouts at any time. However, this was not a problem. He did not plan to do anything within the sphere of influence of Xianhong Heaven. Once he went beyond the heavens, he would not need this item anymore. Wanjin Junren saw that all the items had been delivered and said his goodbyes. Zhang Yan did not urge him to stay and stood up to send him off. Then he returned to his residence and sat down. He picked up the jade slip and scanned it with his consciousness. The records inside were extremely detailed. It included Mountain Lord Che Yan's cultivation time, his cultivation progress, what kind of divine abilities he had, what kind of strength he had, and where he usually lived. However, now that he understood Mount Luo Monastery's goal, he naturally would not continue down this path. Because continuing on this path was destined to be fruitless. As for the information on this jade slip, it was not without value. At the very least, it let him know that there was definitely something wrong with this Mountain Lord Che Yan. If he were to meet him in the future, he would have a good idea. On the other hand, in the lower realm where Mountain Lord Che Yan resided, there was a side branch that Mount Luo Monastery mentioned. He could take this opportunity to pay a visit. Chapter 15-16. Zhang Yan didn't plan to stay in Xianhong Heaven for too long. After receiving Enlightened Master One's letter, he prepared to leave. But before that, he had to do something. After learning that there was a demon bull living in the upper reaches of the river, he took the opportunity to learn more about it. He found that this demon had followed its master to travel around for thousands of years. After thinking about it, he felt that this demon was very familiar with the Yuhuan heavens. If he could make use of it, it would be much more convenient to travel between the heavens. With this thought, he summoned the formation spirit and said, "Since the demon bull on the mountain has no master, how about handing it over to I?" The formation spirit was startled and replied, "I can't make the decision, but I can ask the sect steward on behalf of Shang Zhen. He should be able to give Shang Zhen an answer." Zhang Yan nodded and said, "Then go, I will wait here for your reply." The formation spirit bowed and said, "I'll be right back." With a flash of light, it disappeared from the main hall. Not long after, the formation spirit came back and said with some embarrassment, "Shang Zhen, I've already asked, but the steward said that even if the demon bull is useless, Luo Mountain Monastery has raised it for so many years for nothing. We can't let anyone take it away so easily." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "That makes sense. I won't take something from your sect for free." With a flick of his sleeve, 3 bottles of pills flew out. "Take these pills to your sect's steward." The formation spirit hurriedly said, "Enlightened Master, please wait." He called a boy over and told him to bring the pills to the steward. This time, it took several hours before the formation spirit received a reply. He immediately came to report to Zhang Yan and said, "Shang Zhen, the steward has agreed. Shang Zhen can take the demon bull away at any time." As he spoke, he took out a golden ring. "This is a bull taming instrument. If it doesn't listen, you can use it to teach it a lesson." Zhang Yan did not think that there would be such a thing. He took it and looked at it. He immediately knew how to use it. He waved his sleeves and ordered the true formation spirit to retreat. He then left the main hall and rode a cloud upstream. When he reached the peak of the mountain, he gently pushed the cloud away and revealed a fine house. In front of the open space in front of the door, a navy blue two-headed bull was sleeping soundly. As if it noticed the fog had dispersed, one of the heads opened its eyes lazily. When it saw Zhang Yan, it revealed a surprised expression and slowly got up. It lowered its eyes and said, "Shang Zhen isn't from Luo Mountain Monastery, right? What are you doing here? What orders do you have for me?" Zhang Yan looked at him and knew that he was used to being disciplined by his sect, so he said, "You must be that Chu Zhao. I'm going to go beyond the heavens, so I'm lacking someone who knows the way. I heard that you've traveled the heavens before, so I made a deal with the steward of your sect and asked for you. From now on, you'll be following me." Chu Zhao immediately became spirited and said, "So, I can leave this place?" Zhang Yan nodded and said, "Yes." Chu Zhao was very happy and bowed down. "Then from now on, Shang Zhen is my master." Zhang Yan didn't take out the golden ring when he saw that Qin Shi was very tactful. He summoned the skyscraper vessel that was left on the cloud platform and said, "Do you have anything to pack? Make some preparations and we'll be departing soon." Chu Zhao seemed to think of something and said hurriedly, "Master, please wait for a moment." It stomped its 4 hooves on the ground, and its 2 heads touched the ground with the tips of its horns one after another. Immediately, there was a rumbling sound. After a short while, a stone house that was 10 feet wide and shaped like an altar rose from the ground. Zhang Yan looked at it and asked, "What is this?" Chu Zhao said, "Shang Zhen, before Zhenren Ruan reincarnated, he left a lot of things in it. He said that if Shang Zhen was willing to take care of me, he would give them to him as a reward. But once the Zhenren passed away, the tea cooled after he left. No one has ever asked me. Since I am leaving this time, I might as well give these to Shang Zhen." Zhang Yan's interest was immediately piqued. He landed on the ground and gently pushed the stone door. The door silently retreated. He walked into the room and looked around. Although the stone room wasn't big, it was spacious inside. It was filled with all kinds of strange things. There were feathers, scales, fur, shellfish, and vine leaves. There were also many rare items. Many of them should be top-notch treasures, but they were left here with no one interested in them. He thought that this Zhenren Ruan seemed to be indifferent and didn't have any close friends. Otherwise, he wouldn't be like this. He turned his eyes again and saw a row of jade slips in the corner. He reached out and took it. His mind turned inside and his eyes lit up slightly. It turned out to be the record of Zhenren Ruan's own travels. It was a good thing and could be regarded as the biggest gain since he came here. Of course, it also depended on whose hands this thing fell into. If the Shang Zhen of Luoshan Monastery got it, he was afraid that he would only put it on the shelf. But in his hands, it was very useful. Even if the records inside were thousands of years old, they were still of great reference value. He put away the jade slips. Seeing that there was nothing worth paying attention to here, he left. When he got outside, he rolled up his sleeves and put the whole stone house away. He said to Chu Zhao, "If there is nothing else, let's go." Chu Zhao responded, and smoke rose under his hoofs. He followed Zhang Yan and flew to the magic boat. He thought that the inside of the magic boat would be cold and empty and boring, just like when he was Zhenren Ruan. He could only sleep during the journey. But when he boarded the boat, he found that it was a different world. There were valleys, rivers, plains and lakes, lush vegetation, and creatures everywhere. Except for the sun, moon, and stars, it was almost no different from the outside. He couldn't help but stare. Zhang Yan waved his hand, and the 4 restrictive formations swayed, covering the whole magic boat. He said, "Chu Zhao, there are not many restrictions in my place. Except for my place of cultivation, you can go anywhere you want." Chu Zhao said happily, "Thank you, master." Zhang Yan said, "Do you know Mountain Lord Cheyenne of Liuya World?" Chu Zhao replied, "How can I not know? This old demon has been in the lower bound for tens of thousands of years. He is very famous. The Shangzhen of the temple has tried many ways to drive him away." Zhang Yan said, "No matter how powerful a demon is, in front of the Luo Mountain Temple and many Shangzhen, There is no reason why it can't be taken down. There must be a story behind it. Do you know? Chu Peng said, Master has asked the right person. This mountain master of Che Yen was originally a single-horned goat. I don't know where he got his luck, but he actually became the disciple of the Heavenly Lord Silence, and he even took him as a foster relative. This Heavenly Lord has remarkable abilities, and is much stronger than the sect master of the Luo Mountain Monastery. I'm afraid that is why the Heavenly Lords were unable to do anything to this single-horned goat. Zhang Yan smiled faintly. The Luo Mountain Temple's move was obviously to kill with a borrowed knife. They first used his knife to get rid of the demon, then used Shangzhen Master Guanji to get rid of him. Although the result might not be the same, their intention was very sinister. But now was not the time to be calculative. When the time was right, he would have a good talk with them. He flicked his sleeves and returned to the main residence. Using his mana, he drove the sky-scraping ship and flew towards a cloud platform in the sky. A few days later, he saw a stone arch that was tens of thousands of feet tall standing in front of him. This was known as the Ring of 10,000 Emptiness. Rumor had it that it was created by the Palace Master of Green Jade Palace. There was this item in all the small and big worlds. Cultivators could use it to travel to the heavens without crossing the void's primal sea. It could be seen that there were many cultivators patrolling outside the stone ring. Ordinary cultivators had to pay offerings to the sect when they passed through. He had the letter that Adept One had given him to clear the way, so naturally no one came to stop him. He was allowed to pass through the ring and head down to the lower realm. At this moment, in the Luo Mountain Temple, Taoist Gong suddenly had a sudden impulse. He called a disciple over and asked, "Disciple, where is Priest Zhang?" The disciple said with a gloating expression, "I'm just now staring at the disc. He's already gone to the lower bound. It looks like he's really going to cause trouble for Mountain Master Che Yen." Taoist Gong thought for a moment and said, "He doesn't look like an impulsive person. He might not really fight the demon in the lower bound, but at least he left Shenhong Heaven. This is a good thing." He didn't expect Zhang Yan to fall for the trick. He just wanted to make things difficult for him. In his opinion, Zhang Yan was still unwilling to give up and wanted to find out more about Demon Lord Che Yen. The disciple said, "Master, do you think he'll come back?" Taoist Gong thought for a moment and shook his head. "Unless he really killed that demon, he won't come back for a while. Even if he comes back, I don't think he'll have the face to mention the divine item again." The disciple said, "Master is wise. With just a little trick, you drove him away." Taoist Gong smiled reservedly. However, he could faintly feel that this matter wouldn't end so easily. The divine item was something that Luo Mountain Temple had to protect. It couldn't fall into the hands of an outsider. He thought to himself, there's still 1,000 years until the time limit set by the Patriarch. It's not a long time, but it's not a short time either. If I can find a way to delay this person outside, it'll be much safer. After thinking for a while, he said, "Disciple, take my jade slip and send it to Taoist Zhu Rong. Ask him to do something for me." The disciple listened carefully and bowed. "Don't worry, Master. I'll definitely get it done." On the other side, Zhang Yan had successfully entered Liyue World. Since he knew about Mountain Master Che Yan's background, he naturally wouldn't provoke this demon for no reason. He turned the skyscraping Dharma boat and headed toward the sect that claimed to have inherited the Tao of the great underworld Patriarch. This sect was called the Meridian Sect. The sect was located on an island. When he arrived, he revealed his identity and was welcomed inside. The attitude of the cultivators was extremely humble. He tried to understand it and found that the highest cultivation level here was a Grotto Heaven cultivator. However, he was old and on the verge of reincarnation. There weren't any outstanding figures in the younger generation. Therefore, the place where the sect was built was rumored to be the abode of the great underworld Patriarch. He originally wanted to take a look around, but when he arrived here, he found out that about 1,000 years ago, because the sect was attacked, its inheritance was almost severed. The Shenhong Heavenly Taoist found an excuse and moved the entire continent, including the abode, to the upper realm. Now, this sect actually had nothing to do with the great underworld patriarch. Seeing that he didn't gain anything here, Zhang Yan didn't stay any longer. He left behind some medicinal pills and left in the skyscraping Dharma boat while the cultivators thanked him profusely. He planned to use the ring here to go to Suyang Heaven. When he arrived there, he would first pay a visit to the sect passed down by Taoist Sun Yu before heading to his real destination, the Qinghua Heaven. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.